The rent on my room was due in 4 days, and I had just spent every yuan I owned on a plastic hat. 30,000 for a gaming helmet. I want you to understand what that number meant to me. That was my savings account, my emergency fund, my deposit, and the money I had been quietly setting aside for a couch that did not have a spring coming through it. All of it, gone, in exchange for a silver bowl with a visor that smelled faintly of the factory it came out of. The delivery guy handed it over like it was a pizza. I signed for it with a pen that did not work and had to trace the letters twice. Then I sat down on the couch with the spring in it and looked around my room. 6 square meters, a bed I could touch the far wall from, a window with a view of another window, a rice cooker on top of the mini fridge because there was no counter, and a stack of client folders from Muyun Company on the floor because there was no desk. 28 years old, a degree, 4 years of selling advertising packages to women who owned more shoes than my building had residents, and this was the whole inventory of my life. If you had come in and robbed me, you would have felt bad about it. I remember laughing, out loud, alone, in a rented room, like a man about to be taken somewhere with soft walls. Because here is the thing nobody in that building knew, and nobody on that street knew, and nobody in the entire city of Donghai knew. I had done all of this before. I had lived the next 10 months already, right down to the smell of the corridor, and I knew exactly how the story went, and I knew that in 10 months, every person I could see out of that window would be dead. It was the 29th of May. In 3 days, a hole was going to open in the sky. Let me be very clear about what came through it, since everyone on the planet got it wrong the first time. It was not an invasion, exactly. It was a license. A civilization calling itself the Singer showed up with the bureaucratic energy of a man delivering a summons, and explained to 8 billion terrified people that another species, the Skrulls, had filed a legal claim on Earth's psionic energy, and that the claim had been approved. The Singer's role was purely administrative. They opened the door. They set the rules. They wished everyone the best. Rule 1. Humanity gets 1 year of grace before the Skrulls may make landfall in force. Rule 2. Earth's psionic energy, which had been dead in the ground for 11,000 years, gets switched back on. Springs open. Monsters wake up. Ghosts come back. Enjoy. Rule 3, and this is the one that broke people's brains, was a game. A full immersion virtual world called Evolution, distributed free to every household on the planet, with the small print that anything you earned inside it would eventually become real outside it. Levels, skills, equipment, power. The Singer handed a dying species a training simulator and then sat back to watch, and I am fairly sure they were selling tickets. The first time around, I did what a sensible adult does when the sky cracks open. I panicked. I hoarded rice. I waited for the government to say something reassuring, and I did not buy a helmet for 11 days because 30,000 yuan is a lot of money, and I wanted to see how the situation developed. The situation developed. I was 11 days behind 3 billion people, and I never once caught up. I ended that life as a 4th-tier mage, which sounds impressive until you learn that the men who mattered were 8th, and I died in a city I will not name doing something brave and completely useless. And then I opened my eyes on the 29th of May with a crick in my neck and the rice cooker beeping. So no. This time I was not going to see how the situation developed. This time I was going to be standing at the front of the queue with my hand already out. I put the helmet in a backpack, I put the backpack on, and I went to catch a bus to a mountain. Yunlu Mountain sits about 2 hours out of Donghai, and there is nothing on it. That is the whole point of it. There is a fire road, there is a rotting picnic pavilion, and there is a shallow rock basin near the settlement that 400 years of hikers have walked past without a single one of them noticing anything. I noticed it. I noticed it because in my last life the news noticed it, on the 2nd of June at 9 in the morning, when the largest psionic spring on Earth opened up in that basin, and every camera in Asia pointed at it. Spring Eye number 001. They named it before they even measured it. The news got the time wrong by an hour. The news was reading a press release. The spring actually opened at 8. I was sitting on the edge of that basin at 7:40, with the helmet on my knees, eating a cold bun, listening to birds, and quietly having the worst hour of my life. Because at that point, I had no proof of anything. I had a memory and an empty bank account. If I had been wrong about one detail, I was going to walk back down that mountain and start explaining to a landlord why a man who could not afford rent owned a 30,000 yuan hat. At 6 minutes past 8, the birds stopped. Not gradually, all at once, like somebody had pulled a plug. And then the rock under me went warm, and then it went hot, and then the basin split open with a sound I can only describe as the world clearing its throat. What came out was white. Milk white, shot through with pale violet, and it did not spray, it poured upward in a column as thick as a bus and taller than the trees. The air went so thick I could taste it, and the taste was metal and cut grass and something like the inside of a lightning strike. My skin stung. My eyes ran. Every hair on my arms stood straight up and stayed there, and I, a grown man, was on my knees in the middle of it, jamming a plastic helmet onto my head with both hands and shouting at it to hurry up. The visor lit. Numbers came up on the inside of the glass and started counting. Here is what a psionic helmet does, and here is why I had bet my entire life on that basin. The helmet is a straw. It drinks ambient psionic energy and converts it to game currency at login. Standard atmosphere gives you a trickle. A player logging in from an apartment in Donghai gets 100 points, maybe 120 if they live near a park. That 100 points is your starting capital. That is the wallet the entire species starts the race with. I was kneeling in the throat of the biggest psionic spring on the planet, 1 hour before anybody on Earth knew it existed, and my straw was in it. The counter went past 1,000 in the first second. It went past 1,000,000 somewhere around the fourth, and I stopped being able to read the trailing digits because they had stopped being digits and become a smear. I remember the exact moment my brain gave up on the number as a number and started treating it as weather. I remember thinking, very clearly, that I should probably be worried about what this much raw energy does to the inside of a human skull, and then thinking that I was going to find out either way, so I might as well enjoy the light show. It ran for 11 minutes. When the column finally thinned and my ears popped and the birds came back like nothing had happened, I sat down hard on hot rock with my legs shaking and looked at the final figure on my visor. 10,140,000,000 psionic points. Everyone else on Earth was going to start with 100. I laughed until I was sick. That is not a figure of speech. I got up, walked 6 steps, and threw up my breakfast bun into a bush, still laughing, and then I wiped my mouth and got off that mountain as fast as my legs would take me, because I had one more thing to remember, and it was the important one. An hour later, a Skrull survey ship came down through the cloud layer and settled onto Yunlu Mountain to claim spring number 001. They found a warm crack in a rock basin with the last of the vapor curling out of it. They found the largest psionic reserve on this planet running on fumes, 11,000 years in the making, drained in under 12 minutes by absolutely nothing they could detect. In my last life, that spring fed their entire forward operation for 8 months. I was on a bus. I got home at noon, put the helmet on the couch, and looked at it for a while. Then I ate 2 bowls of instant noodles, took a shower, set an alarm I did not need, lay down on a bed I could touch the far wall from, and did not sleep for 1 single second. 3 days later, at midnight, Evolution went live for 3 billion players at once. You do not arrive in the game so much as get informed that you have arrived. I opened my eyes in a hall the size of a stadium, all white stone and no ceiling, with an altar in the middle of it, and I was standing in a queue that stretched back further than I could see, made up entirely of confused people in identical gray shifts patting themselves down. The altar was the conversion desk. You put your hand on it, it drank the charge out of your helmet, and it paid you in psionic coin. Ahead of me, a man got 108 and said a word I will not repeat. A woman got 94 and burst into tears. The guy directly in front of me got 131 and turned around with his fists in the air like he had won something, and I told him congratulations, and I meant it, and I put my hand on the stone. The altar made a noise no one in that hall had heard yet. 10,140,000,000 psionic coins. I want to be honest with you about my reaction. I did not do anything cool. I stood there with my hand on a rock, staring at a number, with my mouth slightly open, for long enough that the person behind me asked if I was all right. Then came class selection, and I did not have to think about it. Mage. Not because mages are strong at level 1, they are not. They are a wet paper bag with a stick. I picked mage because I had played a mage for 10 months in a world that no longer existed, and I knew every cast time, every cooldown, and every stupid trick, and knowledge is the one thing the reset had not taken off me. Then it asked for a name. The system suggested things. Warm things. Heroic things. I typed Nemesis because in my last life I never got to be one, and because it fit in the box. And then I got to the Bloodline. Bloodline is the game's slot machine. One free roll for every player, a talent baked into your character forever, and for 99 people out of 100 it is a shrug. 10% more health, slightly better at fishing. My roll came up common, some nonsense about resistance to cold, and the system politely informed me that a reroll would cost 10 million coins. 10 million coins, roughly the entire national output of a small country's worth of players. I re-rolled. I re-rolled 211 times. I stood at that altar for the better part of an hour, watching the counter on my own fortune go down in 10 million coin bites, while queues formed and dissolved around me. And every single time the wheel came back, it handed me another piece of garbage, and every single time I fed it again. Somewhere around roll 90, I stopped reading the results. Somewhere around roll 150, I started to feel genuinely unwell. 2 billion coins went into that machine. 2 billion. I could have bought a city. On roll 211, the hall went gold. Legendary. Star Bloodline. And when I read what it actually did, I had to put my hand back on the altar to stay upright, because the first line of it was this: Star conversion. Any power you hold inside this world can be materialized in the real one, starting at level 1. Everybody else was going to spend a year hearing rumors that the game might one day matter outside the game. I was going to be able to throw lightning in my kitchen by Tuesday. The second line was quieter and, over the next few weeks, considerably more dangerous to everyone I met. Star pointing hand. Spend coins, upgrade the quality of an item or a skill. Any item, any skill. No cap listed, which in my experience means the designers did not think anyone would ever have the money to find the cap. I had 10,140,000,000 minus 2 billion and change. The last thing the creator asked me was what I wanted to look like, and I dragged the handsome slider down about 40% because I was about to become the single most conspicuous person in a world of 3 billion people, and I did not need my own face doing it for me. Then the hall dissolved, and I was standing in the mud of Nolan Village, spawn point number 006, at 1 minute past midnight, level 1, in a starter robe, holding a stick. The stick was called Novice Staff, 12 damage. My robe was called Novice Robe, and did nothing at all. My one attack spell was Magic Missile, which at level 1 is a glowing pebble you throw underarm. I opened the equipment panel, put my finger on the staff, and used Star Pointing Hand. 20,000 coins for the first upgrade. The staff went from white to green, and its damage tripled. Another 80 for the next tier, and the green went blue, and the numbers moved again. I did the robe, I did the boots, I did Magic Missile. And then I kept doing Magic Missile, feeding coins into a level 1 spell like a man feeding a parking meter in a city that has abolished cars. By the time I stopped, my little underarm pebble was doing 390% of its listed damage with a half-second cast. I stood in the mud and looked at my panel. Level 1 character, level 10 gear. 21 times the damage output of every other person on this server. Somewhere out there, 3 billion people were reading their tutorials. Cool. Very cool. Love that for me. The village had one shop and one shopkeeper worth talking to, an old magician called Flynn, who had a hut, a beard, and a facial expression that had clearly been ordering him around since birth. He looked me up and down when I walked in, took in the level 1 tag over my head, and told me the alchemy was for real customers. I put a stack of coins on his table. Old men in this game have a very specific way of not looking at money, which is that they look at absolutely nothing else. I told him I would take 800 assorted potions and scrolls. He told me the price. I paid it without asking for a discount, which appeared to distress him more than haggling would have. Then he offered me a quest. Some tidy little errand for the Scholar Sanctuary, killing rats in a cellar, appropriate for a beginner. I told him it was third-rate work and that I did not accept third-rate work. I want to be clear that this was not confidence. This was arithmetic. In my last life, a player found out 4 months too late that Flynn's rat quest has a hidden upgrade path, and that if you insult him correctly, he coughs up the Silver Snake leader version instead, which pays out a chain lightning scroll. Nobody insults the friendly quest giver. It never occurs to anyone. Why would it? Flynn went red, called me an arrogant boy, and gave me the better quest out of spite. I thanked him warmly, which made it worse, and walked out into the fields with 800 potions and a lightning spell nobody else would see for a month. The monster fields outside Nolan Village at midnight on day 1 were the funniest thing I have ever seen. Thousands of people who had never held a weapon in their lives were beating slimes to death with sticks, in the dark, screaming advice at each other. 2 men were arguing about whether you could dodge. A woman had climbed a tree. A pair of them flagged me down near the low-level slope. A cheerful woman calling herself Winter Blossom and her grown daughter Winter Shade, and asked if I wanted to team up, since a mage alone at level 1 dies to a rabbit. I said no thank you very politely and walked past them, straight up the hill, into the level 3 black boar zone, which at that hour was empty, for the excellent reason that black boars killed level 1 players in 1 hit. The first boar charged me. I threw a pebble at it. It came apart in the air. I want you to appreciate this properly. A black boar at level 3 has 400 health. Magic missile at level 1 does 12. My magic missile was doing north of 450 and had a half-second cast, and I was standing on a hillside with 800 mana potions in my bag, deleting a boar every second and a half, alone, in the dark, in total silence. Level 2 came in 10 minutes. Nobody else on that server hit level 2 for another 2 hours. Then the ground shook and the black boar leader came out of the tree line, which is exactly what the guides say is supposed to happen on day 4. Server first kill. There is an announcement for it. I did not read the announcement. I was busy reading the drop, which was a lightning bolt scroll. Lightning bolt is a tier 1 spell, and tier 1 spells do not exist for players on day 1. I stood in the dark with a dead boss and something that should not have been in my hands for a month, and I did the only thing that made sense. I spent 30,000 coins upgrading it before I had even learned it, 390%, half-second cast. It was around then that 7 players came over the rise, found a hillside carpeted with dead boars and 1 skinny mage standing in the middle of it, and stopped dead. An archer accused me of cheating. She said it flatly, like a diagnosis, and I understood her, because from where she stood there was no other available explanation, and because in about 6 hours the forums were going to reach the same conclusion and stay there for 2 weeks. Then their leader stepped up. Big man, big voice, called himself Lian Jiyuan, and he wanted to recruit me. He said the name of his guild the way people say the name of a school they are proud of. Zhan Tian Guild. I have a policy about my own face, and it is that I keep it still. I kept it still. But I want you to know what went through me when I heard that name, because it went through me like cold water down the back of the neck. In my last life, the master of Zhan Tian Guild was a man who called himself Sky Serpent Blade. And 8 months from that hillside, he sold the East China Sea defense line to the Skrulls for a personal guarantee and a piece of the administration afterwards. The line broke in 90 minutes. I am not going to give you the number of people who died because of it. I have carried that number around for a while, and I have found that saying it out loud does not help. I told Lian Jiyuan that I was not looking for a guild. He asked why not. I said I did not think it would suit me, and I went to find something else to kill. Which is how I ended up, 40 minutes later, standing in a sheep pasture with 12 health left, watching a green-named boss the size of a delivery van decide whether to finish me. The hillside sheep leader is level 4 content, and I was level 2, and I had made the classic mistake of a man who has been winning too easily for one night. Its first charge took 94% of my health off. 94. I got the number because I checked it afterwards, repeatedly, like touching a bruise. I was standing in an open field with a stick and 12 points of life and a very large sheep at a dead run, and I want to tell you I did something clever, but the truth is I panicked, drank 3 potions in a row, and threw everything I owned at it while walking backwards. It went down about 2 seconds before I did. Level 3. A wand called Crescent, which was garbage, and 2 scrolls, which were not. Deadly Strike. Warriors only, worthless to me and worth a fortune to somebody else. And Ice Shield. Ice Shield I upgraded on the spot, and Ice Shield is the reason I am able to tell you any of this, so remember it. I limped back into Nolan Village around 3 in the morning and immediately regretted it, because by then the village had become a mob. Word about the Boar Hillside had got around. Word about a server first announcement had got around. There were 400 people in a square built for 12, all of them looking for a level 2 mage, and I walked through the middle of them with my name hidden and my hood up, listing my own loot in the auction house, and not one person recognized me. That is the entire trick, by the way. That is the whole strategy of my second life, in 3 words. Be enormously, catastrophically ahead, and be extremely boring about it. It lasted, I would estimate, another 9 hours. By dawn, I had cleared out of the village and gone north to Wolf King Valley, where an NPC woodcutter guards a chain of 10 introductory quests that take the average player 2 days to grind through. 10 rings of fetch and carry before the game will even look at you. I walked up to him and said a specific sentence about his brother's debt that a player in my last life discovered by accident in the 11th month. He handed me all 10 rings worth of progress at once and asked me to escort his firewood cart. We got jumped by firewood bandits, which is a category of criminal I still do not fully accept exists. I killed them with a spell no human being would see used for another 4 weeks. Then I sat on the back of a cart in the sunrise, eating a pastry an old man had given me, thinking about the queue at that altar, about how many of those people were going to be alive in a year. Then the game handed me Savi's tears, and the mood changed considerably. It came off the woodcutter as a hidden quest, and it started off charming. There was a little girl called Lyra, standing at the mouth of a cave in a red dress with a teddy bear under her arm, and she had lost her way, and would the kind adventurer count out 3,600 steps with her to find her way home. 3,600 steps. Out loud. Together. I counted them. All of them. In my last life, a player did this on month 9, and it made the forums for a week. At step 3,600, standing in front of a very dark cave, Lyra asked me sweetly to go inside and fetch her bear. The bear was in a bush 11 meters to the left. I could see it from where I stood. I had known it was going to be in that bush since before I got on the bus to the mountain. I picked the bear out of the bush and held it up. Lyra stopped smiling. I am not going to pretend the next part was dignified. The bear became 4 meters of level 6 flaming grizzly called Griswold in an open field against a level 3 mage, and I fought it for 11 minutes with everything in my bag and finished it with my back against a tree. The reward was an item called Tear of the Goddess, and the description said something no other item in the game said on day 1, which was that it could be upgraded, and that upgrading it far enough opened a main storyline. Main storylines are the spine of this world. There were meant to be a handful of them, discovered slowly over months by guilds of hundreds working together. I burned the bush down on my way out because I am not a nice man about certain things, and Lyra stood in the field behind me and swore in the voice of a small child that she would remember me. She did. She came back with a dragon, but that comes later. Before that, there was a woman called Wintershade standing at the field's edge with her father, watching me walk away with the quest they had spent all night trying to trigger. And there was a woodcutter who sold my name for a bag of boar meat, and there was her voice behind me in the dark going, Nemesis. I will remember that name. Everybody was going to remember that name. That was rather the problem, because by the time I got back to the village gate, 300 players were fighting in the street over a toll. A big, loud man in black had set himself up at the gate, charging every passing player 5 coins to enter. And he was doing it while loudly collecting on behalf of Zhantian Guild, which he was not. His name was Shadow Flame Drake, and he belonged to a completely different outfit called Emperor Bloodslaughter Heaven. And the whole scheme was a frame job to make the largest guild in the world hated in every village at once. It was, I have to admit, quite good. I stood at the back of the crowd and watched 300 people scream at each other about attacks, and I thought about the East China Sea and about how in 9 months these exact people were going to be asked to hold a line together. Then I walked up to the gate and one-shot him. The number that came off Shadow Flame Drake was 125. He had 411 health. He did not have time to finish the word he was in the middle of. His 100 friends came at me, and I put up Ice Shield and stood in the middle of them and let them hit it. They could not dent it. 100 players, level 3 and 4, hammering a level 3 mage's shield for 11 straight seconds without moving the bar. And while they did that, I killed roughly all of them, 1.5 seconds at a time, in a village square at 7 in the morning on the first day of the world. When it was over, I did not say anything clever. I stood there long enough for the survivors to get a good look, and then I told them, in a completely reasonable tone of voice, that they should go and post about it. And they did. Oh, they did. I logged out around 8 cold takeaway standing up, and spent 40 minutes on my phone reading a thread with 2 million replies about a level 3 mage who killed 100 people in a village square, and about whether the whole thing was a marketing stunt by the game company. Half the internet had decided I was a hacker. The other half had decided I did not exist. Zhantian Guild's press machine, which was very good, was busy converting the entire incident into free advertising for Zhantian Guild. So I sent Shadow Flame Drake a friend request. He accepted it immediately, which tells you a great deal about him, and within 10 minutes, I had learned that Emperor Bloodslaughter Heaven was the in-game arm of Muyun Company, which was the advertising firm I had worked at for 4 years, whose president had personally denied me a raise in March. Small world, getting smaller. I talked him into a public confession. I framed it for him. Full apology, complete transparency, deep regret, and one carefully placed sentence explaining that the toll idea had been suggested to him by someone in Jiantien. He posted it at 9:40. By 10, the forums were a civil war. By 11, the 2 largest guilds on the server had stopped leveling entirely and were fighting each other in the comments of a thread about a 5-coin gate fee. Then I logged back in, went to Silver Snake Valley, and started stacking Tear of the Goddess to maximum because I had a main storyline to open and about 6 hours of quiet in which to do it. When the item finally maxed, the game gave me my first epic quest, and I read it 3 times. Lyra's Revenge. Objective: survive 1 attack from the Star-Forging Dragon King, Aurelian's Soul, level 84. Time limit: 6 hours. Failure condition: permanent account deletion. Reward: the main storyline, Glory of the Wisteria Empire, 6 hours to survive 1 hit from a level 84 dragon as a level 4 mage, with my entire existence on the table, in a world where losing my account meant losing the only advantage keeping 8 billion people alive. I checked the clock, went to buy some very specific boots, and started planning. First, I needed Chain Lightning, and Chain Lightning was sitting inside a snake. Flynn's Spite Quest wanted the gallbladder of the Silver Snake Leader, which is a level 6 boss that lives at the bottom of a ravine and kills level 6 players. I was 4. I went anyway, because the alternative was standing in a village square for 6 hours waiting to be deleted, and I have never been good at waiting. The snake was 30 feet of muscle with a dad's like a shovel, and it moved faster than anything I had fought. It got me twice. The second time it got me, I went to 11% and had to drink 2 potions mid-cast. That is a thing you are not supposed to be able to do. I could only do it because I had spent an hour that morning upgrading my mana potions from white to blue, purely because I was rich and bored. Boring investments. That is the whole secret. Nobody ever tells you the story of the man who won because he improved his consumables. Server first kill on the Silver Snake Leader, level 4. I carried a gallbladder the size of a football back up the ravine in both arms. Flynn took it, went quiet, and handed me Chain Lightning without meeting my eye, which I think was as close as he could get to an apology. I upgraded it 3 times before I left his hut. Chain Lightning at rare quality jumps 4 targets, does 390% of listed damage, and has a cast time of half a second. There was no player on that server who had ever seen a Tier 1 area spell. There were guilds with 800 members whose entire arsenal was sticks, and that, I am fairly sure, is why Sky Serpent Blade decided to come and recruit me personally. He walked into the village square around 3 in the afternoon, with 4 of his core officers spread out behind him in a shape I recognized, because it is the shape people stand in when they have already decided how the conversation ends. Good gear, matched cloaks, the guild master of Jiantien in the flesh, come down off the mountain to make a personal offer to the strange level 4 mage everyone was talking about. He was polite. That is the part I remember. He was extremely polite. He said my name like it was a title, and he told me that a talent like mine deserved a proper platform, and that a man alone in a world like this one was just an accident waiting for a location. He was right about that last part, obviously. He was going to be the location. I stood there and looked at 5 men, and what I saw was the East China Sea defense line in about 8 months, and a signal going out from a command tent, and a line of ships turning at the exact wrong moment, and a number I do not say out loud. I said, that is a generous offer, and then I cast Chain Lightning. It jumps 4 targets. There were 4 officers. They came apart at the same instant, all 4, in the middle of a square, in front of maybe 60 witnesses, and their bodies had not finished dissolving before I was already looking at their boss. I will tell you what happened outside the game at that moment, because I found out later, and it is my favorite detail of the entire first week. In a villa on the coast road outside Donghai, in a room with 5 reclining chairs, 4 men tore their helmets off at once and sat up screaming, and the 5th one did not move at all. Because their entire operating theory had been that the level 4 mage on the forums was a buffed account, a company stunt, a temporary thing. 4 seconds of lightning took that theory away from them in a room with the air conditioning on. I did not kill Sky Serpent Blade. I want to be honest about why, and the honest answer is not merciful. A dead guildmaster resurrects in half an hour with a grudge and no information. A living guildmaster goes home, sits down in a very expensive chair, and spends the whole evening explaining to his officers that he does not know what just happened. That is worth more, so I let him stand there. Then I sent him a friend request so I could see when he logged in. He accepted it. Of course he accepted it. He was in shock, and it was the only thing in front of him that looked like a normal social interaction. After that, I went and did the single least glamorous thing I have ever done in either of my lives. I sat down next to an NPC and talked to him for 2 hours. His name was Elder Thomas, and he ran nothing, sold nothing, and stood outside a grocery in the town beyond the valley with a rake. Every player who had walked past him in 3 days had got the same 4 lines of dialogue and moved on. Standard scenery, furniture that breathes. Elder Thomas has a hidden quest. It triggers on the 5th full pass through his dialogue tree. The 5th. Nobody on Earth found it in my last life until the 9th month, and the man who found it did so because his headset broke and he fell asleep in the conversation loop. So I stood in the sun and said the same 9 sentences to a man with a rake, 4 times through, while players walked past me and audibly wondered what was wrong with me. On the 4th pass, his eyes changed, and he told me about a girl in his town who had lost her father's shop. Kira's struggle. Hidden quest. And that one turned out to be the most important thing I did in the entire first month. Inside the grocery, I ran into Wintershade, which was awkward since I was standing in the store with the quest she had spent all night failing to find, wearing the face of the man who had taken Savi's tears off her family. She recognized me immediately. She did not shout. She just looked at me for a long moment with an expression I had not earned. Here is what she did not know, and I did. In my last life, she took Lyra's revenge, because she was brave and she was fast, and she thought 6 hours was plenty of time to solve a puzzle. She went at the dragon with a plan built around a cliff. The plan did not work. Permanent deletion, on day 2, one of the very first accounts in the world to be erased, and she spent the rest of the war as a civilian with a helmet she was not allowed to use. I offered her a breastplate, a good one, well above her level, free. She refused it, which I respected, and asked for a friend request instead, which I gave her. Then she told me where to find the girl from Elder Thomas's quest, and warned me that Lord Blackburn's people had already got there. I ran. Lord Blackburn's gate was 100 meters of gravel, and a crowd of about 40 townspeople standing very still, which is a sound all its own. At the top of the steps, a butler in a gray coat named Maximilian was reading out a figure of debt owed by the late owner of the Morning Song grocery. Then he explained the arithmetic in the reasonable vote of a man who has done this many times. The estate could not pay. So the daughter would be entering the household in settlement and would remain there until the sum was cleared. He said it the way you would announce a change to opening hours. The girl at the bottom of the steps was 17 years old, in a shop apron, and she had a wood axe in both hands. She was not crying. I noticed that first, and I have thought about it since. 40 adults were standing in a semicircle watching a household seize a girl for a debt, and the only person in that crowd whose face was not doing anything at all was the girl. Maximilian told the guards to take her. I said out loud from the back of the crowd that I would advise against that. He looked at me the way you look at a dog that has made a noise like a word. Then he told the guards to take her anyway. Chain lightning jumps 4 targets. I did not stop at the guards. I am not proud of the next part, but I am not going to lie to you about it either. 3 of the townspeople in that crowd had spent the last 4 minutes shouting encouragement at a debt collector, and the spell went where I pointed it, and the square got very quiet, very fast. Then I walked through it, took the axe out of her hands, put it against the wall, took her hand instead, and walked her up the steps and through her own front gate. Her name was Kira Ramirez, and she came up to my shoulder, and she asked me, on the 3rd step, very calmly, whether I was about to die. I said, probably not today. Inside the manor, a Captain Davies came at us with 14 men, 1 cast. Then Davies, who was face down on his own tiles at the time, and had reached his conclusions rapidly, sold out his employer in about 9 seconds flat, including where the man kept the paperwork. Lord Blackburn was a level 8 mage. I was level 4. He was also a man who had never once in his life fought anybody who was actually trying, and it showed from his first cast. He telegraphed everything. He talked while he cast. He put up a fire barrier against a lightning caster and looked genuinely offended when it did not help. I put Ice Shield up, walked at him through his best work, and burned him down from 4 levels below without taking a single point of damage. He asked, at the end, if I knew who he was. I said no, and I meant it. and that seemed to bother him more than the dying. The study had a strongbox, and the strongbox had a fireball scroll and a stack of correspondence in it that was, on inspection, an entire treason case. Letters, amounts, dates. A baron of the empire quietly selling the border road to the wrong people. I took the letters to a district supervisor called Harper, who read 4 lines, went white, and read the rest standing up. The empire pays for that sort of thing with a medal of honor. I got 2. And out in the courtyard, while I was standing there holding 2 medals and trying to work out what to spend them on, Kira Ramirez walked up and hugged me. She did not say anything. She hugged me the way you hug someone when you have been holding an axe for a while. Then she stepped back. I found out later that she had put her father's debt receipt into my coat pocket. It was her family's entire remaining paperwork, and in her mind, it was the only thing she owned that was worth giving. And the game, which had been watching all of this with a great deal more interest than I realized, opened a second main storyline on the spot. Saintess of Oran City. 2 main storylines. On day 2. In a world where guilds of 800 were still arguing about who got to loot slimes. The Mage Guild took both medals off me and gave me blink and invisibility, and I upgraded both before I was out the door, and then I went and spent an obscene amount of money on leather. Movement speed. That is what I bought. Boots, belt, gloves, anything with a movement roll on it, re-rolled and upgraded and stacked until the number on my panel said 12 meters per second, which is roughly a cheetah with a grudge. I asked Wintershade, casually, over the friend channel, what she would do if a level 84 dragon took a swing at her. She said she would find a cliff and jump off it at the last second, so the claw went over her head. It is a good plan. It is a clever plan. It is the plan that got her deleted, because Aurelian Soul's claw does not sweep, it comes down, and a cliff is just a place where you are lower. I did not tell her that. I have thought about whether I should have. My plan was worse in every way except the one that mattered. My plan was to stand next to somebody the dragon was not allowed to kill. There is a rule in this game about protected characters. An NPC flagged as story critical cannot be killed by an event boss because it would break the world. The village chief of Nolan Village was story critical. Aurelian Soul could vaporize 3,000 players in a breath, and he physically could not touch that old man. So all I had to do was stand close enough to the old man to be inside the exclusion, and far enough that the game still registered me as a target, and then blink out of the swing. That is it. That was the entire plan. Stand next to an old man and trust the fine print. 29 minutes on the clock, I sent 2 messages. To Sky Serpent Blade. I said I had it on good authority that Emperor Bloodslaughter Heaven were summoning a world boss in Nolan Village Square and intended to take it as a guild first. To Shadow Flame Drake, I said the same thing about Zon Tien. They both believed me instantly, which says something about both of them, and they both came and they both brought everyone. By the time the timer hit 6 minutes, there were 500 Zon Tien players on one side of that square and 300 Emperor Blood on the other. In ranks, guild tags flying. And behind them, and around them, and up on the roofs, there were thousands more, in from every village within traveling distance, because word had got out that the 2 biggest guilds in the world were about to fight over a boss. The 2 guild masters stood 20 meters apart, in the middle, shouting accusations at each other with the whole server watching. I stood off to the side by a well, next to a very confused old man who was trying to sell me a turnip. The sky went blue-black at about 90 seconds. It did not get dark like weather, it got dark like a lid. And then the clouds opened around something that had stars inside it instead of scales, and Aurelian Soul came down over Nolan Village with a wingspan wider than the village was, and on the claw of his right foreleg, sitting side saddle with her heels swinging, was a little girl in a red dress. 800 players stopped mid-argument. I have never heard a crowd that size go that quiet. Lyra pointed at me, and a mark of flame lit up over my head, visible from anywhere in the square. I pulled my hood up. It did nothing at all. It made me feel better. The dragon looked at the old man beside me, and I watched something extremely large make a very small administrative decision. Then it looked at me instead. The claw came down. I want to describe this properly. It did not swing. There was no arc, no wind-up, nothing to read. A shadow the size of a house simply arrived, top to bottom, and the last thing I saw before I hit blink was the underside of a talon filling the entire sky. I came out 15 meters to the left with my ears ringing and the ground still moving, and the square where I had been standing was a crater with a well in the middle of it. Quest complete. Survive 1 attack. I had about 1.5 seconds to feel good about that, because up on a roof to the north, a girl called Cloud Serpent, who was 14 years old, who had been in that crowd purely to watch a guild fight, and who had apparently decided that the correct response to a dragon holding a child hostage was archery, stood up and put a heart-piercing arrow through Lyra. True damage. Ignores everything. It killed her instantly. And Aurelian Soul, who had come down out of the sky to settle a personal grievance on behalf of a child, turned his head and looked at 800 people in guild formation. Then he breathed. I ran. I am not going to dress it up. I turned and I ran at 12 meters per second across a village square while the light behind me went white, and I burned blink the instant the cooldown cleared, and I came out on the far side of the gate wall in the grass, on my hands and knees, alive. 3/4 of that square was gone. Not dead, gone. The number that came up over every single person in the breath was the same number, minus 9,999, thousands of times at once. 500 Jiantien, 300 Emperor Blood. Spectators on rooftops. People who had walked in from 3 villages over because they heard there was going to be a fight. And the village chief of Nolan Village, who was story critical and who could not be killed by the dragon, and who had been standing 4 meters from the edge of the breath when it went off, and who was therefore killed by the splash instead. The fine print, it turns out, is a 2-way document. I lay in the grass with my face in the dirt and watched my friends list go gray, one name at a time, like lights going out in a building. The forums, when I finally looked, had achieved a state I can only describe as religious. Nobody knew what had happened. Nobody knew who the marked man in the hood had been. There were 7 competing theories by midnight, and the most popular one was that the game company had run a scripted event to punish guild warfare. And I lay there and did the sums, and the sums were not good. I had wanted an audience. I had got an audience of 800 and set it on fire. And what I had actually built over 2 days of showmanship was 3 billion people who now spent every waking hour arguing on a forum about a hooded man instead of leveling. That is not an army. That is a fandom. In 10 months, an army is the only thing on this planet worth having. I went back into the square at dusk, alone, behind an ice shield, through air that was still hot enough to blister an unprotected player, and I found the old man face down between 2 flagstones with about 90 seconds of life left in him. I could have said nothing. He had no idea. Nobody in that crater had any idea. I knelt down and I told him the truth. I told him that a girl had come with a dragon looking for me, that I had brought her to his square on purpose because I needed a wall between me and a claw, and that I had used him as the wall. He listened to all of it. And then this old man who sold turnips took hold of my sleeve. He told me there was a wolf in the northern valley wearing a crown, and that when I had killed it, I should go to Goldflower City and find a man named Gareth, and that Gareth would take me to the princess. Main storyline. Step 1. He died about 4 seconds after that, and I stayed there a while, and then I got up and went north. I ground woodland grizzlies until dawn, which sounds heroic, and was in fact roughly as thrilling as filing. This is the part nobody puts in the recruitment videos. 4 hours in a wood, killing the same animal at the same interval, watching a bar move. I did it because there is no substitute for it, and because the people who were going to matter in 10 months were the ones who could stand doing it. Level 5 somewhere around sunrise. Then back to Flynn, who had decided that our relationship was now commercial and had priced accordingly. 200 coins a scroll for the restock. I argued him down to 140 over 11 minutes of genuinely spirited negotiation involving his profit margins, my volume, and a brief detour into his opinion of my robe. I wanted on the record that I could have paid 200 without noticing. I had 10 billion coins. The difference was rounding error on rounding error. I fought him anyway, because a man who never haggles is a man who is up to something, and every NPC in that village talked to every other NPC in that village, and I wanted them talking about a tight-fisted young mage rather than an inexplicably wealthy one. 700 Tier 1 scrolls, and a ticket to the Level 5 dungeon, which the guides all agree requires a party of 5. Green Grassland is a dungeon about sheep. I need you to sit with that. 3 billion people were handed a training simulator by an alien civilization with a countdown on it, and somewhere in that simulator is a themed instance about sheep, and it is mandatory. First boss was a field of goats that had to be frozen in place and then set on fire in a specific order, which is Frost Nova into Rain of Fire, and which took me 2 attempts, the first attempt being a valuable lesson in what happens when you get the order backwards. Second boss was the beautiful goat leader, which splits in 2 every time you damage it, and then those split, and then those. I killed 41 goats in order to kill one goat. By the end of it, I was standing in the corner of a walled meadow being slowly filled by an exponential function with hooves, working through them from the outside in like a man clearing a hedge. Third boss was the Chief Shepherd, and the Chief Shepherd does not fight. Nobody in this dungeon fights, that is the joke. You walk into the throne room of an ovine monarch, and he asks you 10 multiple-choice questions about sheep, and you are allowed to get one wrong. I knew all 10 off the top of my head. In my last life, those questions circulated as a single screenshot for about 4 months, and I had them the way you have a phone number you have not dialed since school. I answered them at conversational speed, without pausing, while a very large sheep in a hat became visibly and increasingly upset. Server first clear of a level 5 dungeon, solo, on day 4. The game pays a thing called World Prestige for that. 1 point. There are perhaps 40 points of World Prestige in existence on the entire planet in the first year. They cannot be bought, and each one is worth more than a city block. And along with the point comes an announcement, delivered to every player alive, 3 times, with the name of whoever did it. The system asked whether I would like to remain anonymous. I said no. Which brings me to the megaphone, and to the first genuinely calculated lie of my second life. A megaphone is a consumable that lets one player speak to all 3 billion at once. It costs a fortune, and on day 4 absolutely nobody had bought one, because absolutely nobody had a fortune. I bought a megaphone, and I told the entire species something completely untrue. I said that a wandering NPC in a brown cloak had granted me a temporary blessing, and that this was the reason a level 5 mage had soloed a 5-man instance, and that everybody should keep an eye out for him because the effect was extraordinary. There is no man in a brown cloak. I did it so that 3 billion people would spend the following fortnight searching for a myth instead of searching for me, and it worked considerably better than I deserved. There were sightings. Somebody produced a map of confirmed appearances. A guild ran an organized sweep of 4 provinces. A man wrote a very detailed guide to the encounter, which had never happened, and it was upvoted 40,000 times. And then, while I still had the microphone in my hand, I told them the thing that actually mattered. I said that at level 50, this game pays out something worth more than an apartment. Flat. No evidence, no explanation, no elaboration. And then I hung up. The reaction out here was worse than I expected and better than I hoped. Weibo took about 9 minutes to decide I was a marketing account. Jihu produced essays. The consensus by lunchtime was that I was either paid or unwell, and the phrase that got repeated most was, and I am quoting from memory, "sad little men who think a video game is a job." And then, quietly, over the following 4 days, average daily playtime on the Chinese server went from 3 hours to 9. You do not need to be believed. You only need to be interesting enough that people cannot leave it alone. Contempt and attention arrive in the same envelope. Meanwhile, my own client had frozen solid because 40,000 people were sending me friend requests simultaneously, and I sat in a rented room watching a spinning icon like an idiot, unable to move, holding the largest fortune in the world. But in my bag, out of the sheep, was the first gold quality item on the server, the village chief staff. And gold matters for exactly one reason, and it is not the damage. Gold can leave. 12 hours after login, the star bloodline finally ticked over and did the thing I had spent 2 billion coins buying. I logged out. I stood up in 6 square meters of rented Donghai with the helmet in both hands and my legs completely numb from the knees down. I looked at the far wall, I raised my arm, and I snapped my fingers. A line of white lightning went across my bedroom and put a scorch mark the size of a dinner plate on the plaster above my bed. I sat down on the floor. I did not intend to sit down. My legs made an executive decision. Then I got up and blinked into my own kitchen, which was 1.5 meters away and did not require blinking into. Then I did it 4 more times. Then I stood in there holding the fridge door for balance and laughed until my ribs hurt and I had to sit down again. 3 billion people were on a forum arguing about whether a video game mattered. I was standing in a kitchen setting fire to the air, which is when I stopped laughing because I remembered the buses. Here is the part of that first week that never reached the public. The psionic energy did not only wake things up in the game, it woke things up here. Ghosts, for want of a better word. I have looked for a better word for a long time, and there is not one. The low ones drift. The higher ones get inside people. And on the 4th of June, in my last life, 7 of them got into the teaching corps at Tunghai University, and 41 students died in a single morning. and the official finding was a gas leak, and it stayed the official finding for the entire remainder of the world. I did not have a weapon. I did not have a plan. What I had was a level 5 mage's output in a body that had never been hit by anything harder than a door. So I stole a mask. There is a costume shop 2 streets from my building with a display rack outside. I want it noted that I left money on the counter, and I want it also noted that the only mask remaining in an adult size was Ultraman. I fried every camera on that campus in about 90 seconds, walked into the humanities building wearing a silver superhero face over my own, went up to the 3rd floor, and put my foot through the door of classroom 301. There were 31 students in that room. At the front, there was a woman in her 50s with a marker in her hand and something behind her eyes that was doing a poor impression of a person, and the temperature in that room was about 4 degrees. There was frost on the inside of the windows, in June. I crossed the room and slapped her. Open hand, full weight, no hesitation. I have replayed that a great deal, and I still do not have a better option. It knocked a level 9 soul-eating ghost clean out of her skull and into the air over the 3rd row, where it turned and looked at me with an expression I am not going to attempt to describe. I put it through the window. Then I went out after it, off a 3rd-floor ledge in front of 31 witnesses, and killed it about 2 meters above the flower beds. When a psionic creature dies out here, it does not drop loot. It rains. A fine white mist comes down, and your body drinks it whether you want it to or not. And I stood in a university flower bed in a superhero mask with my arms slightly out from my sides, absorbing 900 experience points from a single kill. 900. A boar in the game pays 9. Real-world kills pay 100 times. Nobody on Earth knew that. I had known it for 11 months of a life that had not happened yet. I walked out through a courtyard full of students who had just watched a masked man throw their lecturer's passenger out of a 3rd-floor window, and one of them shouted after me, asking who I was. I have thought about this a great deal, and the honest answer is that I panicked. I said, "I am Ultraman Tiga." Then I went round the corner and got a bus home, and my phone rang, and it was old Wang from Human Resources at Muyun Company, asking, in a hurt voice, why I still had not signed my resignation letter. Back in the game, Shadow Flame Drake had been begging me for dungeon help for 2 hours. I turned it into a trade. His guild would collect every quiz question from every instance on the server and publish them. I would answer all of them, publicly, for free, for everybody. He thought he was extracting a favor. What he was actually doing was handing 3 billion people a reason to run content instead of arguing on a forum, and doing it under his own guild's banner so that it looked like generosity rather than strategy. Everybody won. I won slightly more. That is the correct ratio, and it is the only one that lasts. Then I put invisibility up and ground quietly to level 7, while every hardcore player on the planet hunted for whoever had killed a level 8 boss in 8 seconds, which is when I first saw Frost Panther. A team of 5 first cleared Thunderbluff at speed, cleanly, with actual tactics, actual assignments, and a leader who played like a man who had done this 100 times before, which he had not. He was simply that good on day 4. And then his guild bought a 2,000 yuan a month scrolling advertisement on the game's front page, which in that first week was the single most aggressive act of ambition on the planet. I sat in my room and looked at that name for a long time. In my last life, Frost Panther became the strongest human being on Earth. Not the richest and not the loudest, the strongest. He was on the East China Sea Line when it broke, and he was one of 11 who came off it. I never met him. I had watched a great deal of footage of him from a very long way back. So when the state finally came looking, I made absolutely sure they found me standing next to him. Wolf King Valley, top of the North Path, 5 military officers and 1 druid, and a man in a hood informing them all that he was 1,900 years old. I held live lightning in my open palm for the entire conversation, because a demonstration is an argument that does not require grammar. I told them the psionic energy was back and was never going away. I told them the ghosts were real and had already killed people they were writing off as accidents, and I gave them 2 dates and a road. And then I told them the only thing I had actually come to say, which was that at level 50, a player in that game becomes a weapon out here, and that they had 10 months to build some. An officer asked my name. I gave them a line from the Yellow Turban Rebellion, the one about the blue sky being dead and a yellow sky standing up. and I hit invisibility on the final syllable so that the sentence finished after I had stopped existing. Was it necessary? No. Was it extremely satisfying? I would like you to imagine being 28, broke, and dead once already, and then imagine 5 colonels going completely silent because you did a bit. Wei Chen wrote it up that night. Political Commissar Zhou read the report twice and then declined to gamble the resources of a nation on a masked man from a video game, which was, in fairness, entirely the correct decision on the information available to him. He doubled the department's budget instead and told them to bring him proof. I went back to the valley and ground to level 8, and at 4 in the afternoon, the sky over the whole server turned red and every player on Earth received the same message. The Howling Moon Wolf King had spawned, all monsters in the region up 20%. 1 hour until it moved on Nolan Village. I went and looked at it, 140,000 health, 12 boss-tier guards moving around it in a screen. And when it crossed the valley floor, it moved faster than I could run, which was the sentence that ruined my afternoon, because my entire survival philosophy up to that point had been built on being the fastest object in the field. I sat on a rock and did the arithmetic on what happens when 4,000 level 8 players meet that in a village square. 95% of them die. The village burns. The entire starting region wipes for a day and a half, and every one of those 4,000 people loses a night they cannot get back. Then I turned around and looked at the ridge behind me, and there was a cliff. Wintershade's plan. The one I had privately filed as the losing plan. She had been right about the geography and wrong about the physics. A cliff is a terrible place to dodge a claw, because the claw comes down, and a cliff is simply a place where you are lower. A cliff is an outstanding place to be standing when something enormous commits its entire weight to a pounce. So all I needed was to be faster than a wolf, and I needed it inside an hour. Which is where being obscenely rich stops being a joke and becomes a weapon. I bought chest armor and re-rolled its stats. Then I bought more and re-rolled that, then more. I stood in a market square feeding a slot machine with a piece of armor in it until a chest piece came up carrying 2 separate movement speed lines, which is a roll so rare that in my last life the first confirmed one surfaced in month 4. Boots, gloves, belt, everything upgraded to rare. And in the middle of that I did something that changed the entire server economy by accident, purely because I had 46 spare rare items in my bag and nowhere to put them. I rented a legitimate market stall and laid them out. 46 blue items. On day 4. On a planet where the best equipment anybody owned was green, and most people were still in starter cloth. I have been told since that the stall is the reason a functioning auction economy exists at all in that world. I have also been told that the first man to buy from it assumed it was a scam, bought 1 item as a test, walked 10 meters, read the stats, and then sprinted back through the crowd knocking people over. I came out of that market moving faster than a tiger and ran back to the valley at a speed that got me reported for movement hacking by 4 separate players, one of whom filmed it and posted it with a title I will not repeat. Then I walked into a valley full of wolves and made myself the single most irritating object in the province. I tagged the Wolf King directly, in front of its entire pack, and then I ran. It came. All of it came. And the trick to keeping a boss on you when it is faster than you is not speed, it is credibility. So I fed a summoned rock elemental into the pack to drag on the flanks, and then I let it catch me. On purpose. Repeatedly. All the way up that slope. I let those claws graze me a dozen times. Not enough to kill. Enough to keep the number on its side of the screen saying this one is nearly finished. This one is worth the last 30 meters. I have been chased by a great many things since, and I can tell you that the hardest part of being hunted is doing it badly on purpose while your health bar drops, and every instinct you own is offering you sensible alternatives. 6 meters from the edge, I fell over, and then I lay there. I want to talk about those 2 seconds, because they were the longest of both my lives. Face down in the dirt at 11%, listening to 140,000 points of Wolf King come up the slope behind me at a dead run, with my entire plan resting on whether an animal chose to bite or to jump. Pounce is a commitment. Pounce puts the whole mass of the thing into the air on a fixed line with no correction available. It pounced. I hit blink at the exact instant its feet left the ground. I came out 6 meters to the left, and 140,000 points of Howling Moon Wolf King went over the cliff edge at full extension, screaming, with nothing underneath it for 500 meters. And then I jumped after it, because I was not about to lose the loot rights. Frost Nova on the way down, purely out of spite. A leather sack held over my head like a parachute, which achieves approximately nothing aerodynamically, and which I would absolutely do again. 500 meters of fall damage on a level 8 mage with 11% health. We hit at the same time. And in the crater, through the dust, flat on my back with a broken sack still in one hand and my ears not working, I watched the equipment start to rain. And somewhere in the middle of all that green and blue, one piece was coming down lit up gold. 19 minutes before the siege was due to begin, every player on Earth received a system message informing them that the siege had ended. I would like you to picture 4,000 people standing in a village square in battle formation, having spent an hour organizing themselves into wings and reserves. There had been speeches. Somebody had drawn a diagram on a wall. One guild had appointed a man specifically to be in charge of morale, and he had been doing it, out loud, for 40 minutes. And then the sky said, "Thank you for your participation." The forum verdict landed inside 90 seconds, and it was unanimous. Zhantian Guild had stolen the world boss. Of course they had. They were the largest guild, they were already the villains of the week, and they were the only organization on the planet with the manpower to have plausibly done it. Sky Serpent Blade spent the next 3 hours denying it to an audience of 11 million people who had finished deciding before he started typing. I was at the bottom of a 500-meter drop at the time, lying in a crater, going through a dead wolf's pockets. The haul was obscene. A gold-quality health potion, which nobody on that server would see the equal of for 2 months. 3 pet eggs, 3 green skill scrolls, 50-odd pieces of equipment, 10,000 coins, which was a rounding error to me, and about 8 months of income to anyone else alive. I sat on the Wolf King's skull with all of it spread out in front of me and had a genuinely difficult think. Because the sensible move was to sell it. 50 pieces of gear at day 4 prices was a real fortune in real money out here where I had 4 days until the rent. And the problem was that I did not need money. I had 10 billion coins and a landlord I could clear for a decade with one auction. What I needed was 3 billion people who knew how to fight, and you cannot buy that. You can only teach it, and the only teacher anyone was going to listen to was consequences. So I put all of it back in the bag and decided to spend it on a guild I had not started yet. Meanwhile, the forums were burning me alive by proxy. They had established that somebody had killed the Wolf King, they had not established who. And the thread that took over that afternoon was about how contemptible it was, how selfish, how one player had robbed 4,000 people of their first world event in order to have a trophy. I read about 900 replies of that in my room, eating instant noodles at 11 at night. Then I logged back in and walked to the valley outside village number 1, where a second Howling Moon Wolf King had spawned on the standard timer. And I did not kill it. I farmed its guards instead, carefully from the outside for 40 minutes, thinning the screen without touching the boss. And then I walked away and let it go where it had always been going to go, which was Qingfeng Village, at full health, into a square with 3,000 unprepared players in it. I stood on a hill and watched. It took 11 minutes. The server wiped the entire starting region for 48 hours. 3,000 people found out what 140,000 health looks like when it is not lying on its face at the bottom of a cliff. And at the end of it, that wolf was standing in a burning village at 46%, having given up 54% of its life to 3,000 human beings fighting together with everything they had. 46%. I did not post about it. I did not need to. The thread about the selfish thief who stole everybody's boss died overnight and never came back. And by morning, the entire conversation had shifted to a completely different question, which was how anybody had killed one of those alone. That was not a nice thing to do. I know that. Nobody out here died, and everybody in there lost 2 days, and I made the judgment that 2 days was cheaper than 3 billion people going into a war believing a world boss is an event you attend. I have made that trade a number of times since. It does not get more comfortable. Level 10 at 7 in the evening on day 4. The leaderboard opened that night, and it opened with my name at the top, 2 clear levels above second place, in a world where the gap between second and 50th was half a level. Wei Chen looked at that board over dinner at the relevant department, put his chopsticks down, and did not pick them up again. I spent that evening upgrading everything I owned to epic quality, and epic is the tier where numbers stop being numbers and start being physics. Ice Shield acquired a property called Physical Barrier. It negates the first instance of physical damage you take, up to 10 times the shield value. Read that again with the outside world in mind. That is not a game mechanic. That is a man standing in a street being immune to the first bullet. My staff started granting 3 consecutive blinks instead of 1, which turns escape from a decision into a habit. My lightning went to 100% paralysis chance, which means every cast is a stun, which means anything smaller than a house simply stops being permitted to move. Then I took the Wolf King's head back to Nolan Village, and the new village chief examined it with tremendous seriousness and informed me that he intended to have it stuffed and mounted in his front room. I asked why. He said there was a widow 2 doors down, so I stood in a hut at the end of the 4th day of the end of the world, holding the severed head of a world boss, while an elderly man explained his romantic strategy to me in some detail, including a section on positioning and sightlines. He paid me for it, in fairness. He gave me a sword that he described as the best sword in the village, which was true in the way that being the tallest man in a hole is true. It came apart in my hand when I drew it, physically fell to pieces. And then I read the tooltip and discovered that this length of scrap stuns anything of any level for 3 full seconds, 10 times before it breaks for good. 3 seconds does not sound like a great deal. 3 seconds is the whole difference between a fight you lose and a fight you win, and I have got more out of that broken sword than out of half my legendary equipment, and it is going to come back into this story twice. He also gave me a horse. A red mare, respectable speed, and hopelessly in love with me, which was not a turn of phrase, but an actual quest tag hanging over her head. Centaur's unrequited love. Accepted, obviously, because you do not decline a quest. I would like the record to show that I did not ask for this. With the head handed in, the main storyline moved to step 2. Reach Gold Flower City. Find the princess's bodyguard. I got about 40 meters out of the village before the mob formed, because on day 4, nobody on Earth had a mount, and I was sitting on one, in public, at a walking pace. I went invisible with 300 people running at me and rode out through the middle of them, which brought me to Amumu's Lament, the level 10 instance, the second of Lyra's 3 storybook dungeons, and the only one of the 3 that a single human being can physically complete. The first boss is Desert Emperor Renekton, who also does not fight. Renekton plays Snake, the actual game. You are the snake. You move around a walled arena eating things and getting longer, and if you touch yourself you lose and start again, and a Sand Emperor, the height of a building, watches you do it with the patience of geology. I lost twice. The second time I lost with 3 squares to go. Then, once you have beaten a 4,000-year-old God King at Snake, he makes you spot the difference between 10 roosters. 10 roosters, one of them slightly wrong. Point at the wrong rooster and you go back to the snake. I have fought a dragon. I have fought a vampire assassin. The roosters were worse. Second boss was Griswold, back for a rematch. 4 meters of flaming bear in an enclosed room. Except this time Lyra was standing behind it in her red dress, and the rule of the encounter was simple. A single point of damage to the girl drops a minus 9,999 on your head and deletes the run. So I fought a boss the size of a lorry in a walled space at level 10 using nothing but single target spells, while a child wandered around the arena at random, on fire, on purpose. I have never concentrated harder on anything in either of my lives, and that includes the mountain. Third boss was Fizz, and Fizz is where I stopped enjoying myself entirely. Fizz's arena is 480 tiles. Some of the tiles have mushrooms under them. Stepping on a mushroom ends the run. It is live-action Minesweeper, solo, on a 10-minute timer, and while you are playing it, a small furry creature shoots blinding darts at you from a position you cannot locate, and every 90 seconds the entire board reshuffles itself. I cleared it at 9 minutes and 25 seconds, half blind, standing on a single tile, having worked out the final row by elimination because I could no longer physically see it. Server first clear of a level 10 dungeon, which meant a second announcement, and I had promised myself something. I bought my second megaphone, and this time I told the truth. I said that I had killed the Howling Moon Wolf King, and that I had done it because I had nothing else on that afternoon. The forums spent a week trying to determine whether that was arrogance or a joke, and the answer is that it was neither. It was recruitment, because in the same breath I announced the Yellow Turban Army. Not a guild. I was extremely specific about that word, because the entire species had spent 4 days watching what guilds do to their own members. A guild has a leader who takes and members who give. What I offered was equivalent exchange. You bring me something I need. I give you something you need. We both walk away with the better half of the deal. Nobody swears loyalty to anybody. Nobody is anybody's asset, and anybody can leave on any day without asking. And then, before I hung up, I read out the answers to every dungeon quiz in the game, free to everyone. in a voice 3 billion people could hear. You want to know how to make an entire planet stop arguing and start working? That is how. Not a speech. Homework. The auction results came in overnight. Emperor Bloodslaughter Heaven had paid 80,000 yuan of actual money for a single low-level scroll off my stall, which is the precise moment the world worked out that this was not a game. I logged off, materialized level 10 in a rented room, and spent 3 hours answering 800 forum questions from memory. And then the buses started. There is a mountain road out of the eastern edge of Donghai with a drop on one side and no barrier for 4 kilometers. And on the 6th of June, in my last life, a long-distance coach went off it with 51 people aboard, and the finding was driver fatigue. I was standing in the aisle of that coach when the driver's hands went wrong. He did not swerve. That is the thing I need you to understand about a possessed man, and it is why nobody ever survives one. He turned the wheel gently, at a comfortable speed, with the indicator on, towards a gap in the crash barrier. His face in the mirror was completely relaxed. 2 people near the front were still looking at their phones. I got a hand on the wheel from behind his shoulder and hauled it back one-handed while 50 people screamed, and then I put a lightning bolt through the engine block, because a stopped bus is better than a steered one, and the whole thing shuddered onto the gravel about 11 meters short of the edge. The driver came out of his seat at me, 51 witnesses, no mask, no time. I announced, loudly, that I was Ultraman Tiga, which is not a defense, is not an alibi, and is now, as far as I can establish, my legal name in 3 provinces. Then I burned a soul-controlling ghost out of him, put him down on the floor of his own bus, breathing, and went off the side of the mountain after the nest. The records said 8. In my last life, the team that finally cleared that ravine in September counted 8. There were 19. And one of them was red. I had never seen a red one. Red means first tier, which at that point in the world's history meant a thing that had no business existing for another 4 months, and it did not attack me. It looked at me. That is all it did. It looked at me, and my hands went heavy, and my thinking went slow and warm and pleasant, and I became extremely reasonable about the idea of sitting down in a ravine and staying there. I bit through my own bottom lip. The pain broke it, and I put an earth spike up through the middle of that thing before my legs had finished remembering whose they were, and then I cleared the rest of that ravine over about 40 minutes with blood down my chin and my hands shaking. 400 people were going to have died on that road over the following month. I sat on a rock in the dark afterwards at level 11 and let that arithmetic happen somewhere behind my eyes, and I did not feel triumphant. I felt like a man who had managed, on one single occasion, to be on time. Then I searched the Red One's soul, and the ravine stopped being the story, because that thing had not drifted in from anywhere. It had been grown, fed, cultivated out of the psionic overflow of one specific spring over a specific number of days by somebody who knew exactly what they were doing and why. The spring was mine, Yunlu Mountain, number 001, the one I had drained on day 1 and left running on fumes. And 2 Skrull warriors had walked out of that spring eye, in the flesh, on Earth, 11 months before they were legally permitted to set foot on this planet, and they had gone straight to the Muyun building in central Donghai. Rule 1, 1 year of grace. That single clause was the load-bearing wall of the entire calendar of both my lives. Somebody had just stepped over it like a garden hose. I went to the Muyun building at 4:10 the following afternoon and signed my resignation letter at reception, because old Wang had now called me 3 times about it, and because I am, at heart, an administrative person. Then I fried every camera in the building from the lobby and started walking up. I swept it floor by floor, feeling for psionic energy the way you feel for a draft under a door, and I miscounted the floors twice, which is how I came to apologize to a room full of accountants who thought the fire alarm had gone. On the 9th floor, I found her. She was sitting at a desk in the IT department in a gray cardigan, doing something unhurried to a spreadsheet with a mug next to her keyboard, and the psionic signature of a 4th-tier warrior. I walked up behind her chair and spoke to her in Skrull. Fluent Skrull, in the register of an inspection officer attached to their expeditionary command, informing her that her operation had been flagged and that I required her full account immediately. She gave it to me in 11 minutes without once turning around. They had overdrawn my drained spring deliberately. Rupturing a spring eye produces ghosts, which is a nuisance to the locals and an asset to an invading force, and the ghosts on that mountain road were a side effect of a survey. And they had come to Muyun Company for its recommendation algorithm and its user database. 400 million people's habits, locations, faces, and movements, which their commander intended to hand upward as a gift large enough to have a disciplinary finding removed from his record. A man was breaking the only treaty protecting 8 billion people because he wanted a mark taken off a file. I told her to return to base and report a clean inspection. She thanked me for my time. Then I went up to the 19th floor and kicked in the president's door. He was a Skrull in a very good suit, and he had a defensive pill crushed in his fist before the door had finished traveling. Their standard issue, rated to hold against a 5th-tier strike. I put one lightning bolt through it. He looked at his own hand for about 2 seconds. Then he pulled a laser sidearm, and I told him, in his language, that it was a cheap model, and that the officers actually worth being frightened of carry something considerably better. I watched a man understand his entire situation in real time. I killed him, took the gun, and went out through a 19th floor window with a silver superhero mask on my face because I had put it back on in the stairwell like a professional. The consequences arrived 4 hours later, and they were not mine. The Singer civilization does not negotiate, and does not appear. What happened at Yunlu Mountain that night was that the entire Skrull forward fleet stationed there stopped existing, in a single event, with no announcement, and by dawn, the largest psionic spring on Earth had been formally handed to humanity for the remainder of the grace year. Political Commissar Zhou took the call at 4 in the morning. He has described it since as the best news of his life. He had absolutely no idea who had caused it. I was asleep. There was one thing I got wrong that night, and it cost me my privacy for the rest of my life. A girl on the 11th floor of the building opposite had been filming the Donghai skyline for a school project, and at 4 minutes past 6, she caught 9 seconds of a man in a silver mask coming out of a 19th floor window and not falling correctly. 9 seconds. Grainy, shaky, shot through double glazing, at dusk. I did not know about it for a long time, and by the time I did, it had been enhanced, stabilized, slowed, and analyzed by people with equipment whose names I cannot pronounce. What I did do that night, because I was exhausted and paranoid, and both of those are excellent professional instincts, was draw an alarm circle inside my own front door. It cost me 4 hours and a rare scroll. If anything carrying psionic energy crossed that threshold, I would know about it from anywhere on the planet. I would like it noted that I built that ward to protect myself from aliens, and that the first thing it ever caught was a woman from my own government. Before that, though, I had a city to reach. I spent the morning filling out my spell list, which is the least dramatic and most important thing I did that entire week. Tier 0 spells: Frost Nova, Earth Spike, Rain of Fire, Summon Rock Elemental, the boring ones, the ones that scale badly and that nobody buys because at level 20 they are worthless and at level 60 they are embarrassing. I bought every single one and upgraded every single one to Epic. Everybody else on that leaderboard was building a sword. I was building a workshop. And a workshop is what wins, because a sword can only do the thing it was made for, and a workshop can do the thing you have not thought of yet. Then I took a coach to Goldflower City. I want you to appreciate that I did this the slow way, in a wooden carriage, on a road, for hours, with a driver who wanted to discuss the price of grain, because no player had ever arrived in the Imperial capital, and the teleport network does not open until somebody does. I was the somebody. The instant I walked through that outer gate, the game unlocked pets, guilds, chat channels, and first-person recording for every player on Earth simultaneously. 3 billion people received a notification telling them the world had grown a nervous system, and not one of them knew it had happened because a man in a hood had taken a bus. I named the mare Luna. She had been in love with me for 2 days by then, and it seemed rude to keep calling her the horse. I paid to force hatch the wolf egg from the boss drop, because waiting is for people who have time. And then I went to find the man the dying village chief had named, Gareth, bodyguard to Princess Larina, 19 Berglet Street. Gareth turned out to be a rat. I mean that with something approaching affection. He was a professional soldier in a capital that everybody with real information had already written off. He knew perfectly well that the empire was going to fall, and his entire remaining career strategy was to convert his position into portable assets before the walls came down. He looked at me, an outsider with no house, no rank, and no patron, and he saw 4 hours of free labor standing in his doorway. So he used me. A letter carried through bandit country to Forest City. A house watched overnight. A rival's ledger copied by hand. He handed me errands the way you hand chores to a nephew you are not planning to feed. I ran every single one of them at a jog. Every one of them was a step closer to a princess, and I have never once in my life been too proud to fetch something. While I was fetching, the government found the corpse. Somewhere in a facility with nothing on the door, a dead Skrull officer from the 19th floor of the Muyun building was floating in a tank. A room full of people were looking at 9 seconds of shaky footage. And a very sharp young officer named Mei Lin had already put a silver mask together with a resignation letter signed at reception at 4:10 on the same afternoon and produced a name and an address. They sent her alone. That was a compliment, and I did not appreciate it at the time. Gareth settled up with me eventually, and he settled up enormously, because rats are generous when they are leaving. He signed over the deed to his own villa in the capital, a real property in a real district with a garden. And then he told me he would arrange my introduction to the princess, which meant that I now owned a house in an imperial capital and had a bus ticket's worth of belongings in a rented room in Donghai City. My life had become a shape I could not have described to anybody. With time to kill, I went to the Scholar Sanctuary. The Scholar Sanctuary is the academic authority of that world. I went because a badge from them opens doors that swords do not, and I was received by a functionary called Gunter, who looked at my clothes for about a second and a half and then informed me that the sanctuary was not currently accepting nouveau riche with brains full of mush. I asked what the assessment cost. He said I could not sit the assessment. He said the assessment was for scholars. I offered him 1 million coins to let me try. I want to describe his face at that moment because it did something genuinely complicated. 1 million coins is an absurd sum in that world, and he had just told a room full of colleagues that I was an idiot with money, and accepting the money would have proved him right in the least flattering way available. He said no to save face, so I said 10 million. He said no again, in a slightly higher voice, and somebody at the back of the hall put down a book. I said 100 million coins that I passed the senior scholar assessment on the first attempt. There was a sound in that room like a large number of people deciding to breathe later. And then the air folded over and a man simply arrived. No door, no light, just present in the middle of the floor, and every scholar in that building went absolutely still. Caleb, Saint Realm Mage, the kind of being who does not come downstairs for 100 million of anything. He had come downstairs. He took the bet personally, and he took it with the specific pleasant expression of a man who intends to enjoy the next hour. 30 questions, 21 to pass. Magical theory, imperial history, the taxonomy of things that live underwater, the properties of 11 separate reagents, and 1 question about the succession law of a duchy that had not existed for 200 years. I scored 26. The sanctuary's best result in 20 years was 24, set by a woman who had spent her entire adult life inside that building. I got 26 sitting on a stool in a borrowed robe, having learned all of it off a wiki in a life that no longer existed. They gave me the Advanced Scholar Badge, gold, epic quality. The second piece of equipment I could carry into the real world. Gunter apologized. He did it properly, in front of everybody, standing up, without hedging. And then he gave me a polymorph scroll out of his own pocket, and I have never since been able to dislike the man, and that scroll comes back at the very end of this story in a way neither of us could have predicted. A person who can eat that much and then hand you a present is worth keeping. Then my alarm circle went off. Not in the game, at home in Donghai at 9 at night in my actual front door. I logged out into a dark room with somebody standing on the other side of it, and I sat very still on the couch with the spring in it, and I said, through the closed door, at conversational volume, that she could put the gun away. There was a pause on that landing which I have replayed with enormous personal satisfaction for a very long time. Mei Lin came in with her hands empty. Military bearing, civilian coat, a face doing an extremely competent job of nothing at all. She had a folder. Everybody always has a folder. We talked for 2 hours in a room with 1 chair, and she took the chair, which I respected. I told her the truth, or the part of it that was useful, that my power comes out of the game, that the game is a delivery mechanism and it runs both ways, and that anything a player earns in there can be dragged out here if you get far enough. I did not tell her I had lived it before. I have never told anybody that in the way I am telling you. She offered me full membership, Salary, facility access, a team, protection, a legend. I turned it down. She looked at the scorch mark above my bed, and the rice cooker balanced on top of the mini fridge, and the folder in her own hands, and asked me what I wanted instead. I asked for a property deed. She wrote it down without changing expression. It went through in 4 days. I have never thanked her adequately for that, and I am not going to start now because she would find it embarrassing. Then Gareth came through, and I met the princess. Lyrina was 15 years old, and she was the entire surviving legitimate authority of a collapsing empire, and I met her in a throne room with 40 courtiers in it on the day the report arrived that a dragon had come out of the sky over an outlying province and removed a village square. Her response to that report was to issue a strongly worded condemnation. I stood at the back and watched a teenager sign a piece of paper at a monster because a piece of paper was the only weapon anybody had ever handed her, and I revised my opinion of her sharply downward. And then, over the following 11 seconds, very sharply upward, because she noticed me, 15 years old, in a room full of adults, and she caught one man's expression at the back of a hall and filed it. And then her advisor noticed me too, Shadow Priest Rajan, 7th tier. He had been standing at her right hand for the entire audience, and I had not once registered him as a person in the room, which should have told me everything I needed to know, and did not. He asked the princess's permission to eat my soul. He asked politely. He described it as a snack. He used the tone of a man inquiring whether anybody else wanted the last dumpling, and then he took it without waiting for the answer. The Soul Realm is a gray arena with no sky and no exit, and standing in the middle of it was Master Hunter Kale, level 11. Kale is an archer. I need you to understand what an archer means to a mage. Every spell I own has a cast time. His arrows do not. He kites. He interrupts. He does not need to be cleverer than me. He only needs to be further away than me, permanently. He put 3 arrows into me before I finished my first cast, so I stopped casting. I opened my bag instead. And I want you to remember that I had bought 700 Tier 1 scrolls off a bad-tempered old man for 140 coins each, weeks earlier, purely because they were cheap and I was rich and it seemed tidy. Scrolls do not have cast times. I built a wall out of money. Frost, fire, lightning, whatever came out of the bag next, at a rate that no mage in that world had ever been able to afford to sustain, and Master Hunter Kale backed steadily into the corner of a room that did not have corners. And when he finally stopped moving long enough to be somewhere specific, I put a pyroblast into his face from 4 meters. He died shouting that I had no martial ethics. He is not wrong. I do not have any. I have a bag. I came out of the Soul Realm standing in the throne room, and the first thing I saw was Princess Lyrina with a wand leveled at her own 7th tier advisor, at 15 years old, with her hand not entirely steady and her chin up. That is the moment I decided I liked her. Rajan withdrew, smiling, in the manner of a man who has learned something and does not intend to say what. And I stepped forward and sold myself to the imperial court as a scholar of divination. I have never had divination. Nobody in that world has divination. What I had was a life I had already lived and a good memory for detail. I stood in front of a princess in a room full of her own ministers and described, in order, with names and dates, the secret plan she had told exactly 3 people, including the part where she intended to abandon the capital. She went white, and then she went completely still. From that afternoon onward, every impossible thing I ever did in that world was filed under prophecy, and not one person ever asked a second question about it. It is the single most useful lie I have ever told, and I am still telling it. Outside, the world had its own news. Frost Panther's people had picked up what happened at Yunlu Mountain, the fleet that stopped existing, the spring handed back. Nobody knew why. I sat on that information like a hen. And the state told me something in exchange, almost by accident, which was that I was not the only ancient thing walking around anymore. They had woken a second one. A man from the Ming dynasty, more than 600 years old, going by Wang Xian. I filed that away, too. It became extraordinarily important about 11 days later, on a mountain at dawn. Then I went to Oran City because Kira Ramirez was there, and because Kira Ramirez was about to lose a horse. She had joined the Unicorn Knights, which is the Empire's elite order, and the order had informed her that her mare was not of adequate breeding and would be replaced with a proper animal. She told them no. Not dramatically, she simply said no, and then kept saying it, in corridors and offices and at inspections, until eventually a real unicorn knight in real armor on a real warhorse offered to settle the matter in the ring. And Kira Ramirez, 17 years old, 3 weeks out of a grocery, said yes. It took 20 minutes, and she lost every second of it. That is not a turn of phrase. She was outclassed in reach, in equipment, in training, and in the animal underneath her. She was knocked out of the saddle twice and got back up both times. The crowd stopped laughing around minute 6. They went quiet around minute 11. And at minute 19, on the ground, out of options, with her shield gone, she pulled out a snapped-off length of scrap iron. The best sword in the village. I had given it to her in a grocery as a joke weeks earlier, and she had kept it, and she had carried it into a formal duel against a knight of the Empire. 3-second stun on anything, of any level. She hit him with it, and then she had 3 seconds, and 3 seconds was exactly enough. The arena did not understand what it had just watched. I did. I had bet on it. Specifically, I had bet 1,000,000 coins at long odds with a goblin bookmaker who did not have 1,000,000 coins, and when it came in at 3.34 million, he went the color of old paper and sat down on a crate. I have made a considerable fortune off that goblin since. That is a later story, and he tells it better. The immediate problem was that Luna was dying. The mare had taken a lance meant for Kira's leg, and she was down in the sand with her breathing going wrong, and I ran for the temple, and the priests of Orange City informed me, politely, that they do not heal animals. I did not argue. I took out a black crystal card and held it up where they could see the corner of it. 10 priests healed that horse in under a minute, and 2 of them ran. And in the middle of all that, on my knees, in bloody arena sand, with a horse's head in my lap, I noticed something that was going to make me one of the richest men in 2 worlds. Kira had been cut in the last exchange. Her blood was on the sand, and it was not red. It was red, with pale gold running through it, like thread and cloth. I remembered that color. I had seen a single screenshot of that color once, in month 9 of a life that no longer existed, in a thread about equipment enchanting that everybody in the comments had dismissed as a hoax. Her blood gilds equipment, turns quality gold, makes gear real enough to carry out of that world and into this one. I collected 106 drops off that arena floor while simultaneously paying 10 priests 15,000 coins each to keep working, and I did the whole thing with my hands shaking. Kira Ramirez sat on the sand with her arm bandaged and watched a man she barely knew empty a fortune into keeping an animal alive. Her opinion of me went up 30 points in one afternoon. I want to be honest about that because I have heard the story retold in ways that flatter me. I did not do it for the blood. I worked out the blood afterwards, and it took me a further 2 days to understand what I was looking at. I did it because a girl who would not give up a horse deserved to keep the horse. I have made considerably worse decisions for considerably better reasons. The Unicorn Knights took the horse anyway. Kira won her duel in front of 30,000 people, and then a Legion commander who had not been in the arena that day signed a form, and the mare was reassigned on paper by a woman who had never touched her. That is how institutions work. You can beat a man with a sword, you cannot beat a filing cabinet. Luna came back to me instead, and Kira Ramirez stood in a stable yard and said nothing at all for about a minute, which I have since learned is what she does instead of crying. Then her main storyline opened, and her main storyline wanted her to clear a swamp. The Swamp Hydra leader is a ranged boss, and I would like to complain about that for a moment. A Hydra should be a thing that bites you. That is the entire proposition of a Hydra. This one stood in the middle of a marsh and spat acid at us from 40 meters with 3 heads working on a rotation, and every time I closed the distance, it backed up, and I spent 11 minutes being ground down by an animal that was functionally an artillery battery with a face. I ran out of scrolls. I want that on the record. I, personally, a man who had made a religion out of never running out of scrolls, ran out of scrolls in a swamp. Kira finished it with a spear through the middle head, and then she did something I had not expected and could not have stopped. She knelt down and drank its essence blood straight out of the wound. I said her name in a voice roughly an octave above my usual one. She came up gold to the elbows, and then she went up 10 levels in about 4 seconds, standing in a marsh, with her eyes doing something that made me take a step back without deciding to. 10 levels, in one drink. She had walked into that swamp at level 12, and when it stopped, she came over, still faintly luminous, and offered me a thing called bloodline connection. Nobody has ever offered me anything like it, before or since. It is a permanent bond. 10% of everything she ever earns, forever, off the top, no expiry, no conditions, no way to revoke it. She did not negotiate. She did not present it as terms. She said that I had bought a horse, and she had noticed. I took it, obviously. I am not a saint, and I have never claimed to be one. But I want you to hold on to the fact that a 17-year-old shopgirl handed a tenth of her entire future to a near stranger because he paid a temple bill for an animal, and to keep hold of it because there are people later in this story who calculate everything and get much less. The next 4 hours were the single most efficient afternoon of my second life. Her storyline ran from the swamp into a mushroom kingdom, and from there into a place called the Monster Garden. And because of the bloodline connection, every level she gained shed a share onto me. She went from 20 to 40. She went through those instances the way weather goes through a valley, and I walked along behind her at a comfortable pace, killing almost nothing of consequence, and rose from level 12 to level 18 in one afternoon. The leaderboard did something violent that evening, and the forums arrived at the only conclusion available to them, which was that I worked for the game company. There were screenshots. There was a very detailed post proving I was a developer testing content, complete with a timeline. It got 40,000 upvotes and a follow-up. I did not deny it. Why on earth would I deny it? I did, however, nearly lose the entire arrangement over a single sentence. Kira asked me to come with her to the next instance, and I told her I had something more important to do. Her opinion of me dropped by a point in real time. I watched the number move. 1 point. A point I had bought with a horse and a temple bill. So I spent the following 10 minutes bragging about my scholar assessment, shamelessly, in detail. 26 out of 30, best result in 20 years, the badge, the fact that a Saint Realm mage had materialized out of thin air specifically to bet against me and had lost. 11 points back. I have thought about that exchange a great deal. She did not want my time. She wanted to be able to tell people that the man who had bought her horse was somebody. Loyalty is not free, but it is astonishingly cheap if you pay for it in the correct currency, and almost nobody bothers to find out which currency that is. Back at the palace, the court was tearing itself apart over Maple Leaf City. The Empire was in a three-way civil war. The negotiations at Maple Leaf were the last diplomatic instrument anybody had, and the princess had to attend in person. Everyone in that room understood that a 15-year-old head of state traveling through open country was not a diplomat. She was bait, and everyone knew it, and nobody said it. She asked me for a prophecy. I did not give her one. I gave her a trade. I told her I would put 1,000 adventurers around her convoy. Not soldiers, not mercenaries. 1,000 of the immortal outsiders, the ones who come back when they die. The ones her generals genuinely did not know how to count in a table of forces. And in exchange, I wanted the right to post quests in her name. She did not understand what she was agreeing to. In fairness, nobody did. Nobody on Earth had yet worked out that whoever controls the quest board controls the labor of 3 billion people. Or that a quest issued under a royal seal pays reputation that a player cannot obtain by any other route at any price. I then spent 40 minutes at the quest terminal tuning the reward structure, and I want to be honest that this is the least heroic paragraph in this entire account. I moved sliders. I read fine print. I found a clause that pays the posting agent 1% of every completion, and I set the acceptance cap at 1,000 players. 1% of 1,000 people's rewards for filling in a form. Then I cleared the level 15 spider cave alone, sold the drops, bought a third megaphone, and announced it to the world. The response was not what I expected. It was substantially worse. 3 billion people set alarms. Actual alarms on actual phones in every time zone on the planet to be online at the moment a slot list opened for a quest issued by an imperial princess. The forums crashed twice. 1,000 slots went in under 10 minutes, and there is footage from that morning of grown adults crying because they did not get one. Sky Serpent Blade, meanwhile, outthought himself into a hole he never got out of. He looked at a quest posted by Nemesis and concluded that it had to be a trap, and he ordered every member of Zhangtian Guild to boycott it. 800 people sat out the single largest reputation event of the first month because their leader could not conceive of a world in which I did something that was simply good. And Frost Panther did not get a slot either, because Frost Panther had not slept in 3 days, and the game's own vital signs monitor threw him off the server and locked his account for 8 hours. He sent me 11 messages about it. He was extremely upset. He made several arguments about it that were medically incorrect. I have never respected a man more. I also, that week, discovered money. Not game money, I had game money coming out of my ears. Real money, because the game lets you record and sell first-person footage, and I put up my main storyline run unedited, and it made 5,000 views overnight and paid like a salary. I mention it because it is how the relevant department finally got their hands on me properly. They called me in to a new facility with no windows, and I went, and I want you to know that I very nearly did not come back out of it. There was a scientist there, Professor Lee, very calm, very reasonable, and he had a proposal he had clearly rehearsed, which was that the safest and most productive use of the only known human being with materialized psionic capability was to euthanize him and take him apart. He did not use the word euthanize, he used a longer word. He explained that one man cannot be permitted to be a single point of failure for an entire species. He explained that my body would answer questions that would otherwise take a decade of research, and that a decade was not available. He was not a monster. That is the part that has stayed with me. He was a frightened man doing arithmetic about 8 billion people and arriving at a defensible answer. I sat there and said nothing, because there is nothing a man can say in that situation that does not sound exactly like a man arguing for his own life. Frostpanther said it. He was in that room as a consultant. He stood up and he said that sacrificing another person under the banner of the human interest is a shameful thing, and that he would not remain in a room where it was being discussed as a procedure. That was the entire speech. He did not raise his voice. And the room folded, because the strongest man in it had told them what he thought of them, and Professor Lee picked up his folder and left. I have never forgotten that I owe that man my continued existence, and I would like to note that at the time he had known me for about 9 days and believed my name was something else. The square in front of the palace in Goldflower City had become a circus by then. There was a streamer broadcasting live from the steps when a red-haired child walked past and one-shot him for standing in her way, which became the most watched clip on the Chinese server for 2 days, and which she has never explained. There was a queue of guildmasters waiting for an audience with me as though I were a bank. There was always Sober, the martial artist, who had signed on purely because I knew where the hidden class change was, and who was now refusing to demonstrate what he had become to anybody. And there was one player standing at the very back of the crowd with a golden marker over his head, which means a main storyline of his own, and I stared at him for a long time. I still do not know who he was. I have looked. Then the convoy went out and Giantwood Canyon happened. They came at us in the narrow section, which is what everybody expects, with about 1,000 men, which is not. Real bandits, real levels, organized, patient, and commanded by somebody who had planned it properly and had chosen the ground weeks in advance. For the first 90 seconds, it went exactly the way ambushes go. Then the sky above the canyon lit up, because Shadow Priest Rajan and an enemy paladin had gone vertical and were dueling somewhere above the cloud layer, and everything on the ground suddenly became very small and entirely on its own. And the bandits broke on my 1,000 players. I want to describe why, because it was not heroism, it was arithmetic. A player does not stay dead, a bandit does. I had put 400 tanks at the mouth of that canyon, with instructions to hold, die, and come back. And the enemy commander had built his entire battle plan around casualties meaning something, which is when I did the thing I am least proud of and would absolutely do again. The battle was won. Certain. The line was holding, and the bandits were coming apart from the flanks inward. And I looked at the numbers and realized that a princess rescued easily is worth a thank you, and a princess rescued at the last possible second by a man with nothing left is worth a province. So I ordered my own army to lose. I told them to fall back badly, to let the line bend, to be beaten convincingly, on camera, in front of the Imperial retinue for 11 minutes. And they did it, because I was paying 50 coins ahead, and because I had promised them that the last 5 minutes would be the best thing they ever did in that game. I let the enemy get within 60 meters of her carriage. Then 80 of my players walked out in front of the boss on purpose and died, and held their souls in place instead of releasing them, which pins a resurrection point exactly where they fell. I triple blinked through the middle of a bandit army, came out 4 meters from a level 70 berserker, and crushed a badge of equality in my fist. The badge flattens everything inside its radius to a fixed level for 60 seconds. Level 13, everyone, him included. And then 80 corpses stood up at once, on top of him, inside the radius. S rank. The game does not hand those out for winning. It hands them out for narrative. The loot included the first epic weapon on the server, which I did not keep, and 2 points of world prestige, which I would have committed serious crimes for. And when 900 players turned in their quest completions through my posting that evening, the 1% pushed me from 19 to 21 in an afternoon without swinging at anything. The leaderboard the next morning was, functionally, a photograph of who had been in that canyon. Everybody who came moved up. Everybody who boycotted fell off. And Sky Serpent Blade personally dropped out of the top 100 players in the world for the first and last time. He never got back in. And then I posted the strategy, all of it, for free. The stalling tactic, the resurrection point trick, the whole disaster relief official routine of arriving late on purpose so that the rescue looks larger than it is. I explained to 3 billion people exactly how I had manipulated an imperial court in writing, with diagrams. Half of them thought it was a joke. The other half started doing it, and within a month, the political landscape of that world had 4,000 amateur operators in it, which was precisely the point. Maple Leaf City itself was a farce, and I knew it before the doors opened. 3 parties sat down at a table, and all 3 of them were stalling. The princess was stalling because her army needed 6 weeks. The Northern Duke was stalling because his allies had not arrived. The third party was stalling because they were waiting to see which of the other 2 looked weaker first. Everybody made speeches. Nobody made an offer. The session adjourned in 90 minutes. The entire court treated this as a catastrophe. I sat at the back of that hall and read it like a menu, because I had watched this exact conference collapse once already, in a life that no longer existed, in a report I had read on a forum. That night, the princess sent for me. She was not gentle about it. She told me, in her own study, at 11 at night, with nobody else present, that I was too weak. Flat. No cushioning. She said I was the cleverest thing she had, and that clever was not sufficient, and that at my level I could not protect anybody, including myself. She was completely right, and it was the single most useful thing anybody said to me that month. Then she gave me a letter and an address, Green Valley Street, a man named Arthur Finch, who was her own agent inside the enemy's city, and who had gone quiet 9 days earlier. I was ambushed 4 streets in. Vampiresman, level 65. A 4th-tier assassin from the other side who had been sitting on that address for 9 days waiting for exactly this, and who came out of a doorway behind me at a speed that made my level 21 reflexes look like street furniture. There is no defense against a 4th-tier assassin at level 21. There is no clever trick. There is nothing in the bag. I checked the bag. So I logged off. I want you to sit with that for a second. In the middle of a street, with a vampire's hand closing on my collar, I reached up and took a helmet off my own head in a rented room in Donghai City, and the character in that street simply ceased to be a thing that could be interacted with. The single most disrespectful escape available to a human being, and it is completely within the rules. I spent the following 2 hours out here hunting ghosts along the Eastern Ring Road, which put me at level 22, and then I went back in. He was still there. 9 days of waiting had made him thorough. He was standing on the same street with his back to a wall and his eyes on every approach. So I rode past him, brown horse, different tabard, loud, cheerful, badly sung marching song, the entire length of Green Valley Street, waving at people on doorsteps. A knight of no importance whatsoever going somewhere of no importance, with his voice carrying 2 streets in either direction. A 4th-tier assassin looked directly at me for about 4 seconds and then looked at something else. Because assassins hunt people who are hiding. I collected Arthur Finch's reply 4 doors down, put it inside my shirt, kept singing until the corner, and then I ran as though the entire empire were on fire behind me. He caught me 300 meters from the gate. 9 days of patience gave out all at once, and Vampiresman came down the middle of that street at a speed I could not have described afterwards, and I had time for exactly one complete thought. The thought was, well, that is that. Then something came down through the roof of the world. 100 meters of dragon, made mostly of starlight, unfolded above Green Valley Street and put a claw through a 4th-tier assassin without altering its own trajectory, and the light was bright enough that I could see the bones in my own hand through the skin. And then it shrank. Not gradually, it compressed, over about a second and a half, down and down and down, until the thing standing on the cobbles in front of me was a cat. A small blue and white cat with starlight in its fur, sitting in the middle of a street in a hostile city, licking a paw. Moonlight Dew. The princess's pet, which is a description in roughly the same way that a nuclear reactor is a kettle. Lorena was 15 years old, and she had sent her personal beast to follow me into an enemy capital because she had privately decided I was worth an insurance policy, and she had not mentioned it because she was 15 and proud and would rather die than be seen to be worried about somebody. Moonlight Dew let me ride her back to the gate. Her opinion of me improved measurably during the ride. I logged it at the time as a curiosity. It turned out to be one of the 2 or 3 most important relationships of my life, and there is a moment much later where she is the only reason there is a rest of it. Then I had to get into Duke Gideon's manor, and the manor had no way in. I mean that literally. I spent a full hour walking the outer wall in the dark, warded, sealed, layered, patrolled on an irregular rotation, and there was not one weakness on the entire perimeter, because the man who owned it was a duke in the middle of a civil war, and had thought about this problem considerably harder and longer than I had. So I stopped trying to break in and started buying gossip. 20 coins a conversation. I sat in 3 different taverns on 3 different streets and paid ordinary people for the most boring information available about a rich man. What time the deliveries come. Which of his servants is rude to shopkeepers? Whose son works in the kitchen? Who his cook is sleeping with? It took 4 hours and cost me less than a pair of boots. An old man in the 3rd tavern mentioned, in passing, while complaining about something else entirely, that the Duke employed a beautician who came twice a week. And the beautician did not come through the front gate, because the Duke did not care to have it generally known that he employed one. And so there was a tunnel. And the tunnel came out under a woodshed on the wrong side of the wall. The finest defensive perimeter in the province, defeated by vanity, for 80 coins and 4 hours of listening to strangers complain. Inside was worse than outside. The first room was a chessboard 40 meters across, with a rule that you may only move as the piece you are standing on, and I want to be honest with you, I do not know how to play chess. I know how the horse moves. That is the complete extent of my knowledge. Moonlight Dew jumped it. Straight over. The entire board in one bound, and then sat down on the far side and looked at me with the specific expression of a cat who has watched a man stand at the edge of a puzzle reading the rules twice. The second room was 100 meters of trap corridor, pressure plates, pendulums, and things in the walls that I did not investigate. I did not solve that one either. I charged Blink to maximum on the staff, 3 consecutive jumps, and went the entire length of it in the air without touching the floor once. The third room had a jade golem in it, level 21. 4 meters of animated stone with a strike that would have taken me apart at the seams. So I charged Earthshield 25 times and dropped the whole thing on its head from above. 1 hit. 4 meters of rock folded flat by a mage using a defensive spell as a piano lid. I have made a career out of that. Every spell in that game has a listed purpose, and the listed purpose is a suggestion. And the Duke's study, when I finally reached it, was not a study. It was a vault with a desk in it. There was a ring on the table worth 50,000 coins, which went into my pocket without breaking stride. There was the letter I had come for, which was worth an entire province. And underneath a stack of estate ledgers, there was a rolled and sealed blueprint. And when I opened it, my hands stopped working properly for a moment. A wonder blueprint. There are perhaps 4 of them in that world. They are the buildings that change what a settlement is permitted to be, and they do not appear on any market at any price. Which is when the door opened and Thorn walked in. Thorn was the Duke's enforcer, level 61, 4th tier, and he had a reputation I am not going to detail because it was earned in ways I do not want in my mouth. He looked at me. He looked at the open vault. He worked out what I was and what I was holding, and he took his time about it, because a man at level 61 looking at a man at level 21 is not in any hurry whatsoever. He asked whether I knew who he was. Everybody in that world asks that. It is a regional illness. I have been asked that question by 7 separate people, and every single one of them was dead within 4 minutes. I said something calculated to be as irritating as possible, and he came back with exactly the line I had been fishing for, delivered with real relish, which was that he was my father. There is an item in that game called Sorrow of the Fungus. It is a joke. It is a dagger that deals 99,999 points of true damage to any target who has verbally claimed paternity over the wielder within the preceding 10 seconds. Nobody has ever used it. It exists purely so that at some point in a design meeting, somebody could laugh. I had bought it on day 6 for 400 coins because it was funny. I stabbed a fourth-tier warrior with a novelty knife in a vault in the middle of a civil war, and he came apart with an expression on his face that I have taken out and looked at on quiet evenings for the rest of my life. Then I went back to looting, because 30 guards were coming up the stairs, and I saw absolutely no reason to leave anything behind. The last thing in that vault was a Tier 6 experience scroll with 48 hours left on its timer. A scroll that hands a player the full power of a 6th tier being for 2 minutes. In a world where the strongest player alive was level 29, and the strongest thing anybody had personally killed was a wolf, I went out through a random teleport with guards in the doorway, which dumped me 11 kilometers away in a field of wheat, and I lay on my back in it and laughed at the sky for a while. The princess read Arthur Finch's reply in front of me the next morning, and about 4 lines in she went scarlet from the collar upward. I have never learned what was in that letter. She never told me, and I never asked. Her agent had evidently included some personal sentiment along with the intelligence, and a 15-year-old head of state had to stand in a war room full of generals and keep her face still while reading it. Then she paid me, and she paid me out of thin air. Not from the treasury. She prepaid me a brand new Tier 6 scroll out of 2 future mission rewards she had not yet given me and did not yet have. That is a level of financial improvisation I found genuinely impressive at the time and find more impressive every year. 2 weeks of game time went past after that, and they went past the way rot goes past. The Maple Leaf negotiations did not collapse. They continued, which was worse. Jiantian Guild completed its long slide from the most feared organization in the world into a punchline, and the phrase Jiantian strategy entered the language meaning a plan that loses on purpose. And I posted the second scenario battle. Desperate escape, 1,000 slots. They went in 10 minutes. I sat and watched the counter drain like a bath. And then I did something whose real reason I have never told anybody. There were people who did not get a slot, a great many people. So I went out and bought 3 merchant ships at 50,000 coins each out of my own pocket and attached them to the convoy as overflow capacity. I told everyone it was for logistics. It was not for logistics. It was because I remember being 11 days late, and I have a specific and permanent problem with the idea of anybody standing on a dock watching a boat leave. 6 ships went down the river at dawn with a princess on the 3rd one. Frost Panther spotted it first. He came up to the upper deck about 40 minutes out and told me that the 3 merchant boats trailing our formation were riding low in the water. Too low. Loaded when they should have been empty. We put a hook into one of their crates and opened it on the water, and it was full of diving equipment. Empty diving equipment, because everything that had been wearing it was already in the river underneath us, and had been for some time, keeping pace, waiting for the narrow stretch. They came up the sides 11 minutes later, and the entire convoy turned into a knife fight on wet timber. A rare tier water ghost leader got onto the princess's deck, which was the entire purpose of the operation, and it got about 4 meters. I hit it with 1 fireball from the upper deck of the ship behind, and the number that came off it was 8,160. There were 400 players watching that from the water and the rails, and one of them, whose name I have never been able to establish and would very much like to, shouted a nickname across the river. Boss Jin. Not Lord, not Master, not Commander. Boss, in the sense that you use for the man who owns the restaurant. 3 billion people picked it up inside a day. I have never once managed to get rid of it, and I would like it noted that I have tried, repeatedly, including through official channels. The important part came about 30 seconds later, when I stopped watching the fight and started doing arithmetic on it. Those ghosts were not winning. They were never going to win. They had been committed in numbers that could not take 6 ships, and they were dying in a manner that did not resemble desperation at all. That is not an assault. That is a clock. I gave the order to stop fighting. I put every mage in the convoy onto the water behind us and had them freeze the river solid from bank to bank, and we ran. And I was completely right, and being right did not help even slightly, because the delay had already been long enough. Duke Valerius had not sent those ghosts to kill anybody. He had sent them to hold us on the water for 20 minutes while his actual counterstroke assembled. His counterstroke was 1 man, Archimedes. 6th tier, space mage, the greatest living authority on teleportation in that world, and while we had been killing swimmers, he had been opening portals in 11 cities simultaneously and recruiting 10,000 players. 10,000 of the immortal outsiders offered rebel side rewards on a public board, and 10,000 people had said yes, because nobody had ever told them there were sides. The river ahead of us became a wall of shields. Behind us, the ice was going. The fleet stalled between the two, and everything got very quiet, in the way things do when the plan has finished. I had a scroll in my bag with 10 hours left on its timer. I spent 40,000 coins upgrading a consumable I was about to consume, because epic quality extends the duration by 30 seconds, and because I have never in my life been able to leave a number alone. Then I broke it. 2 minutes of charge. 2 minutes standing on the bow of a ship in open water while 10,000 hostile players worked out where the light was coming from and began moving toward it. The scroll lets you take any 3 classes at 6th tier. I took Mage, Druid, and Assassin. And then I stepped off the front of the ship into the air. A 5th tier firestorm does not look like fire. It looks like the sky has developed an opinion. I drilled it into the enemy fleet's elemental shielding, and the shields came apart in sections, the way ice goes on a pond. And for about 9 seconds, I genuinely believed I had won the entire battle personally. Then, Archimedes teleported all 6 of our ships onto dry land. Not sank, moved. 6 vessels and every soul aboard them lifted off a river and set down in the middle of a plain with 10,000 hostile players standing around them in a ring. And then he crushed a badge of equality of his own and flattened every living thing inside 2 kilometers to level 18. He had reasoned it through very carefully and very correctly. At level 18, 10,000 beats 1,000. It is not close. It is not even interesting. He had made exactly one error. The error was that he had gathered 10,000 people into a single place for the benefit of a man who had, 4 minutes earlier, become a 6th tier area mage. I wished them a Happy New Year. Out loud, across the whole field. Then I carpet bombed it. 3,000 died in the first pass, as a mage, in about 11 seconds. Then I switched to Assassin, and went into what was left of them on foot, and I am not going to describe those 4 minutes in any detail except to say that a level 18 crowd cannot see a 6th tier assassin, cannot catch one, and does not get to make any decisions at all. When it was over, I sent Archimedes a private message thanking him sincerely for the assembly. He did not reply. Valerius stopped watching me at that point and went straight for the princess, which was the correct decision and very nearly worked. I hit him with the broken sword, the guaranteed stun, the one that works on anything of any level. It bounced, unstoppable. He had a status immunity running, and I had just spent my only certainty on a man who was immune to certainty, and he put a sword through my stomach for the trouble. So I switched to Priest, the 3rd class, the one I had picked as an afterthought because the scroll asked for 3, and I could not think of a better one. I healed myself up off the deck with a duke's blade still in me, and then I took the mind of a level 77 nobleman standing on the flank and turned him around and pointed him at his own commander. It bought 4 seconds. 4 seconds was not enough. Moonlight Dew teleported the princess out from underneath the falling sword, and in the instant she was extended and open, a small figure at the tree line crushed a seal in her fist. Pebble. A child of the Pandaren, using something called a rebirth seal, which does not target the enemy at all. It targets the caster. She spent her own strength, all of it, permanently, in one irreversible action, and it took a 100-meter starlight dragon out of the sky. I looked up, and there was a cat falling, unconscious, limp, dropping out of the cloud layer with a princess falling beside her, both of them turning over, neither of them able to do anything about it. The scroll had about 11 seconds left on it, and I did the only thing available to a man with a druid's shapes in his pocket and no time to think, which was to become a storm dragon and catch 2 people out of the air. The game rated that fight SSS. I have never seen another one. I have never heard of another one. The aftermath was the strangest reward I have ever been given, because the game simply deleted 6 chapters of its own story. Main storyline steps 20 through 25, gone, marked, resolved, skipped entirely because the plot had assumed the princess would lose that battle, and she had not. The princess handed me a fresh Tier 6 scroll with 773 days left on it, and 900 players turned in quest completions through my posting that evening, while I sat on a ship's rail doing absolutely nothing at all. And the 1% took me from 22 to 26. I put the recording of that battle up for sale that night. It did 50,000 views in 40 minutes and paid out 230,000 yuan. 230,000 for a video. I sat on the floor of a rented room I could touch both walls of and looked at a payout notification for a while, and then I got up and paid my rent for the next 18 months in one transaction, and the landlord phoned me twice to check that it was not an error. Then Mei Lin got hold of it, and it stopped being about money. She pushed it onto the national trending list, which I had not asked for. And then she did something considerably cleverer, which was to make it required viewing. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers were ordered to sit down and watch 9 minutes of first-person footage of a man being a 6th-tier mage. Not to learn tactics. There are no tactics in it. To feel it. So that when somebody in a uniform was eventually told that a video game was a weapons program, the idea would already have a shape in their head and would not have to be argued. I have never given her enough credit for that. She took my showing off and turned it into doctrine. My wolf egg hatched around then into an epic-grade beast, and I named him Big White, which is not a good name, and I have been told so, and I stand by it. And Always Sober finally cracked his hidden class change, which involved buying a Pandaren monk 10 jars of morning dew wine and then outlasting him at the table. He would not tell anybody how he had done it for 3 weeks. He told me on the second day because I was the one who had told him the monk existed. Then I went and bought a country. Territory is the real game, and almost nobody had noticed. A player who owns land does not farm monsters, he farms population, and population compounds, and there is nothing else in that entire world that compounds. I paid Oran City Hall 200,000 coins for the right to select my own site instead of accepting an allocation, another 100,000 for the master survey map. And then I sat in a clerk's office for 2 hours with a chart and a ruler, being extremely boring in front of a man who could not work out what I was doing. What I picked was a river mouth 12 kilometers from the sea, not a defensible hill, not a mineral field, not the good farmland which everybody else was fighting over. A river mouth, because 4 expansions from now, that world opens naval trade, and the settlements already sitting on deep water when it happens do not have to move. Nobody in that room understood the purchase. The clerk asked me twice whether I was certain. I named it Apuxi Village, which is a transliteration of up sea, and which everybody assumed was foreign and profound. A territory runs on 3 numbers: population, prosperity, livability. They feed each other and they starve each other. Low livability and nobody stays. Low population and nothing gets built. Low prosperity and nobody eats. Every other lord in that world spent months trying to raise all 3 with taxes, decrees, and watchtowers. I started with 4 ragged farmers standing in a field looking at me. I gave them roast meat with black pepper on it and 50 coins a day. Their loyalty went to 100 out of 100 in one evening. 100, the maximum value the system holds. 4 human beings who had eaten nothing but boiled grain their entire lives sat down in front of a fire and were handed seasoned meat by a man who did not appear to want anything from them, and the loyalty system simply gave up and capped out. The other lords were building walls. I was doing catering. Frost Panther brought 500 guild members in at 20 coins an hour to lay foundations, which meant that inside a day my village had a labor force larger than most cities, all of them immortal, none of them needing to sleep, all of them being paid on time. Then there was the tavern. Every territory gets a tavern, and every tavern is a slot machine. You pay, an adventurer walks in, and the adventurer is almost always rubbish. Common talent, poor statistics, no use to anybody. That is the entire business model, and everybody knows it. Cloud Serpent, who was 14 and had joined the Yellow Turban Army because I had once answered a forum question of hers about arrow scaling, offered to do my draws. She pulled 5 excellent grade talents in 100 rolls. 5. The base rate is somewhere under 1 in 100. I made her do it again the following day, and she pulled another one, and from that afternoon onward, nobody else was permitted to touch my tavern, and I have never in either of my lives met a luckier human being. One of the 5 was a butler called Arthur, and I knighted him with a ceremonial sword in front of the entire village, which cost me nothing, and which he has never once stopped mentioning to anybody who will stand still. And then 12 starving people came out of the forest, refugees. The empire was full of them by then. The standard mechanic is that you offer them shelter, and some of them accept, and the ordinary rate is about 4 out of 12, because they are frightened, and you are a stranger with a wall. I had 2 pots of meat soup carried out to the tree line and set down in front of them, and then I walked away. All 12 joined. Everyone on first contact at triple the standard rate. And after that, word moved along the refugee roads faster than any recruitment post could travel, and the Puxi village stopped being a place I was building and became a place people were walking toward. The guild recruitment post broke the forum, incidentally. 66 yuan an hour, real money, paid to players for construction labor. It was the highest wage available on the planet in either world, and people quit actual jobs for it. And I have since been shown a news segment about it that I am not going to comment on. And somewhere in that week, my battle video passed 2 million views because a few 100,000 soldiers had been ordered to watch it and had then shown their families. Then Kira called me to Oran City because she had her Unicorn Knight entrance trial and she wanted me there for it. She made me sit through 40 minutes of her changing armor. Not vanity, I want to be clear about this because I misread it at the time and said something extremely stupid about it that I would like back. She was 17 years old. She was about to walk into a trial in front of the order that had taken her horse away from her on a form. She had exactly one chance to look like somebody who belonged in that hall, and she came out in 4 different configurations and asked me which one looked like a knight. I said the third one. It was the third one. The trial was in halves, hers and a partner's, and I was the partner, and my half was a duel against another candidate's squire, a girl of about 16 with a spear and a very great deal to prove. I did not fight her. I sat down on the sand and offered her sunflower seeds. She said no. I ate some. I offered again. I asked about her spear, which was a good spear. I asked where she was from. I complimented her footwork, which was genuinely excellent, and which nobody had ever complimented before, and I could see that land. I kept offering that girl sunflower seeds for 11 straight minutes in front of a full gallery, and eventually she put her weapon down on the sand and burst into tears, and the judges ruled it a forfeit. I am entirely aware of how that sounds. I would point out that she was 16, that I was a mage with a bag full of Tier 1 scrolls and a bad temper, and that the only other available outcome was killing her in front of her instructor. Kira, meanwhile, beat her own instructor, cleanly, in 3 exchanges, in front of the whole order, which is when I walked her over to the trial portals and did the worst thing I did to her in the entire first month. There were 2 portals. Green was the standard trial. Blue was the advanced one, the one that had killed 4 candidates within living memory, and which nobody at her rank was permitted to attempt. I led her 1 meter toward the green portal, and then I stepped left and pulled her into the blue one. She did not have time to say anything. I have often wondered what she was going to say. The void is not a place, it is a color with things in it. And the things came at us in numbers that made no arithmetic sense, and Kira Ramirez went through them like industrial machinery, cutting void creatures in half 2 at a time, while I stood behind her and talked to them. That is my entire contribution to that fight. I speak void. I learned it off a wiki in a life that does not exist. It does not let you command them, and it does not let you calm them, but it lets you confuse them, and a confused void creature turns its head to find the voice. She buffed me up to her own level with a blade oath, which I had not known she could do, and which she had not mentioned, and we cleared the mini-bosses for void stones. And then we hit Malzahar. Malzahar opened by imprisoning me. 10 minutes. Total lockout. No casting, no movement, no speech, suspended in a sphere 4 meters off the ground. And I want to tell you that I fought it. I did not. I let it happen, and then I let it continue, because I had read the trial parameters and the trial was hers. If I fought that boss alongside her, the game would rate it a paired clear. If she fought it alone, it was a solo clear, and a solo clear at her rank pays out something that does not otherwise exist anywhere in that world. So I hung in a bubble and watched a 17-year-old fight a Void Lord for 9 minutes while I could not move or speak or help. That is the longest I have ever been unable to help somebody, and I have been in some situations since. At 9 minutes and 40 seconds, Malzahar wound up his final energy pulse. She was at 3%, and the imprisonment expired. I came out of that bubble on a triple blink and threw her the broken sword, not for the stun. Sorrow of the Fungus does something else as well, buried at the bottom of its tooltip in the small print where nobody reads. If you stab yourself with it, it heals you. She caught a snapped-off length of scrap iron in midair, put it through her own shoulder without breaking stride, came back to full, and killed a Void Lord with the follow-through. S rank. The reward was Ice Barrier, which I upgraded to Legendary that same night and which became the single most important spell I own. At Legendary, it breaks control effects, and it can be cast while imprisoned. Every single thing that happens to me from that point onward happens because of one line of text on one upgraded defensive spell. There was also a fortress blueprint, which went straight into a Puxi village. Kira jumped 3 levels on the clear. Her Legion commander, a Saint Realm woman called Astrid, took her aside afterwards and warned her at some length not to allow herself to be blinded by a rich outsider's money. Kira listened politely to the whole thing. Then she came and found me and asked whether we could go back in and do the other portal as well. Back home, the village hit 4 hours old with 28 residents, 20 houses, and a city hall nearly finished, and Cloud Serpent pulled an epic-grade farmer out of the tavern at odds of roughly 1 in 1,000, and I formally gave up on the concept of statistics. And 15 vials of Kira's blood finally gilded the Tier 6 scroll to gold, which meant I could now carry a 6th tier mage's power out of that world and into this one at any moment of my choosing. I kept it in my bag for 11 days. Please remember that it was there. The last recruitment of that week was a man who would not be recruited. Mad Marvin lives alone outside the village in a shack surrounded by plants that he talks to. He is an epic-grade agricultural talent, and every lord in that province had tried to hire him. He had turned down all of them, flatly, without negotiation. He would not leave his garden, and he would not discuss leaving his garden. So I did not hire him. I bought his research instead, a 30-year magic contract. 200 coins a day plus 5,000 a month, paid to a man to stay exactly where he was, doing exactly what he was already doing, on the single condition that everything he discovered belonged to Apuxi village. He signed it in about 4 seconds, and then gave me a present out of gratitude, which was a walnut, a large golden walnut. 500 health, 1 taunt ability, no offensive capability whatsoever, no defensive application, no crafting use. The single most useless item I have ever been handed, and I put it in the bottom of my bag out of politeness, and there it stayed for a very long time. Then 2 more game days went by, and Kira got herself into a duel she could not afford. She had joined the Legion properly by then, and the Legion contained a Windsor heiress called Jessica, who had decided that a grocer's daughter with a wealthy sponsor required correcting. She said so in a mess hall in front of about 40 people, at some length, with a theme. Kira ended her in 1 strike. Not a fight, a strike, which was satisfying for approximately a day and a half, until the Windsors went out and bought an instructor, a woman named Sarah. Professional, considerably stronger, purchased for 100,000 coins for the specific purpose of challenging Kira publicly and taking her apart on the sand in front of the entire order. And that is where I stopped being a mage and became a bookmaker. I had acquired a goblin by then. Zoltan Grimax had been standing on a bridge over the Oran River with 2.3 million coins of gambling debt behind him and nothing at all in front of him, and I had walked up, paid every coin of it, and hired him on the spot. He runs my book to this day. He is the second most useful person on my payroll, and the first is a butler. 21 million coins went onto that duel against Kira. Against. The entire province bet against her, because Sarah was better, and because everybody knew Sarah was better, and because they were right. And I made Kira mortgage her house onto her own win. I want to be honest about how that conversation actually went, because it was not a rousing speech, and I have heard it retold as one. She asked me what I thought her odds were. I said I did not know. She asked what I was betting, and I told her the truth, which was everything I could raise at short notice. And then I told her that if she was going to walk into that arena thinking she might lose, she should stay in the stands, and that if she was not, she should put the house on it. She put the house on it. Sarah drank a Tier 6 rage potion in the 3rd minute. The pre-duel contract prohibited enhancement of any kind, explicitly, in writing, signed by both parties and witnessed by the order. And the referee, who had been paid, ruled that a potion is not a weapon. 30,000 people watched a serving imperial official read a rule backwards in broad daylight, and I did not appeal. I jumped off the top tier of the arena and fireballed him. From a considerable height, in front of 30,000 witnesses, in the middle of a sanctioned Legion duel. The silence afterwards was geological. And then Astrid, the Saint Realm Legion commander who had spent a week warning Kira about me, came down out of the officer's box in full armor and refereed the remainder of that duel herself, because at that point there was no other way for the Empire to hold its own face together. Kira won it anyway. She won against a Tier 6 rage potion on monster blood and stubbornness and a broken sword, and I made 15 million coins in an afternoon and did not enjoy a single second of the 11 minutes in the middle. Afterwards, she came and found me. She did not mention the referee, then or ever, and I have always been quietly grateful for that. She put a small gray pebble into my hand and told me it had come out of her father's fireplace and had been sitting in it for her entire childhood. Hearthstone, gold quality, instant teleport home from anywhere within 1,000 kilometers, 2-hour cooldown. The single most valuable escape item in that world, worn smooth by 3 generations of a family that never once knew what it was. She fell asleep at the table about 4 minutes later, mid-sentence, still in her armor, with one gauntlet off. I put a blanket over her and went outside and stood in the street for a while, doing sums about how many people were now going to want her dead. Helmets were down to 3,000 yuan by then, which meant 2 million players in my country alone, and I spent an evening on the forums watching the shape of the world change under my thumb. What I was actually reading was the terms and conditions of a video platform. Because the Singer civilization does not merely run the game, it runs the storefront. And the storefront has an overseer, a real being, sitting in a villa in the capital with a commission on every view of every recording any human uploads. I had worked that out on about day 9, in bed, at 2 in the morning, and it had kept me awake. Because a being who takes a percentage of human footage is a being with an interest in humans continuing to produce footage. And a being with an interest is not a god. A being with an interest is a counterparty. Nobody else on Earth was reading the revenue share terms of an alien media platform. Every strategist in every government was studying the invasion timetable. I was studying a payout schedule, the way you study a fence for the loose board. That was the long road. It ran, in the end, all the way to me standing on another planet in a borrowed body with a fake driving license. And it started with a man in a rented room deliberately overreading a comments section. Always Sober mailed me a jade dragon statue that week. Unprompted, no message, no conditions, as a thank you for telling him which monk sold the class change. I had given one man a piece of trivia, and he sent me a wonder-tier building material worth more than most territories. I have never worked out whether that was gratitude or an investment, and I have never asked because I like him. Then Kira did not wake up. She had been asleep at that table for 11 hours. They had moved her to a bed and brought in 2 temple priests, and both of them had come out shaking their heads because there was nothing wrong with her body. There was nothing wrong with her at all, in the sense that a locked room has nothing wrong with it. Obsession, that is what they call it there. It takes people who have wanted one thing too hard for too long, and it closes over them, and it does not particularly care whether they got the thing. Astrid was in that room when I arrived, being extremely correct about the whole matter. I asked her, in front of her own officers, whether she wanted to know why we were standing there. She said she assumed I was going to tell her, so I did. I said that Kira Ramirez was lying in that bed because a Legion commander had watched a bot referee rule a Tier 6 rage potion legal in a duel her own order had sanctioned, and had done precisely nothing about it. Not until a stranger set the man on fire in front of 30,000 witnesses and made it too public to file. Her regard for me dropped 5 points in real time. I watched the number move. Then I took out the princess's token and held it up where the room could see the seal. 15 points back. That is the entire lesson of that afternoon, and it is not a nice one. An institution does not accept an apology, and it does not accept an argument. It accepts a higher letterhead. Then I went into Kira's head. The inside of a person is not what you would expect. I had expected something vast. It was a maze with low ceilings and wet stone, and it took an hour to walk, and everything in it was small. There was a snake in a doorway. Just a snake. The one that bit her behind her father's shop when she was 9, and it was enormous in the specific way that things are enormous when you are small, and it had been sitting in that doorway for 8 years. Further in, there was a spider in a jar. She had caught it when she was 11, and meant to let it out, and she had forgotten, and it had died in there. That is the whole event. That is the entire crime. And somewhere inside a 17-year-old who could kill a Legion instructor in single combat, that jar was still on a windowsill with the lid on. I want to say something about that, because I have thought about it more than almost anything else in either of my lives. You do not get to choose what your mind keeps. She had killed men by then, actual men with names in the road, and the thing waiting for her in the dark was a spider she had failed to release when she was 11. And then there was a cat. It was ordinary, gray, thin, and completely silent, and it came across that stone floor towards me with no aggression at all, no growl, no crouch, nothing that any part of my training recognized as a threat. And something at the base of my skull started screaming before my conscious mind had received a single piece of information. I did not let it touch me. That is the entire account of that encounter. I put every scroll in my bag between that animal and my body, and I kept a wall of ice and fire and rock in the air for 4 minutes, and I did not let it get inside 2 meters of me. I found out afterwards what its touch does. It does it once. There is no second one. The gatekeeper at the end of that maze was 30 meters of standing stone. I did not fight it either. I opened my bag and started charging Summon Rock Elemental, which is a Tier 0 utility spell that produces a knee-high lump of gravel, and I fed it until the thing that came out of the ground was 30 meters of its own, the Rock Emperor. And then I sat down against a wall with a potion and let 2 mountains ruin each other for 4 minutes. When they had finished, I put lightning through what was standing. The reward was an item called Echo of the Ghost Cat, 10 charges. Each charge does damage equal to 100% of the target's current health, and it ignores shields, and it ignores damage reduction, and it ignores every defensive mechanic in the game except a hard level ceiling. 10 instant deaths in a bag. I have spent them extremely carefully. There are 2 of them in a later part of this story, and one of them ends ahead of state. Past the gatekeeper, I did not find a boss room. I woke up inside a 9-year-old girl. Her entire life, from the start, running at speed, and I was in it. Not watching it, wearing it. Her hands, her height, her voice, her father's shop, the smell of the back room. So I fixed it. I kicked the snake across the yard. I opened the jar and shook the spider out into the grass and stood there at 11 years old, watching it walk away. I did every small, stupid, unforgivable thing she had spent 8 years not forgiving herself for, one at a time, in a body that was not mine. And when we got to the arena, I put a lance through Astrid in front of the assembled legion, because that was the one she had never once let herself want. Every one of those corrections came out of that life as a crystal, 99 of them by the time I reached the middle, because the obsession was waiting at the center, and it was 5 tall, and every crystal I had taken out made it smaller. That is not a metaphor the game invented. That is the actual mechanic. The thing shrank as I unpicked it, 5 meters to 4, 4 to 3, until what was standing in front of me at the end was a doll about 1.5 meters high, with 683 points of health, 1 lightning bolt. That is what an obsession is, and I have never been able to unsee it since. Not a monster, a very small thing that has been fed for a long time by somebody who did not know they were feeding it. Then the ceiling of Kira's mind came off, and a god walked in. Orion, Starfeather, 8th tier, guardian of that entire empire, a name carved into the pediment of buildings I had walked past every week, standing in a dead girl's memory palace, with his hands behind his back, looking at her the way a man looks at a horse he has already decided to buy. He announced that she was Destiny's choice, and that he would be sponsoring her personally. And I, at level 26, standing next to a literal god, with mud on my knees and somebody else's childhood still ringing in my ears, asked him whether he did tutoring. There was a pause. I want to describe that pause. It went on for about 6 seconds, and during it, I became aware of every individual thing I had ever said out loud. Then he gave me a stopwatch. Gold, legendary. 5 seconds of absolute untouchability on a long cooldown, which does not sound like a great deal, and which is, in practice, the difference between being alive and being a paragraph. And he opened a legendary quest on my panel, and it read, "Become my student when you reach the 6th tier. I want you to remember that sentence." It sat grayed out on my quest log for 11 days. Kira woke up in the real world about 9 seconds later, and the first thing she said, in front of her commanding officer and 2 temple priests, was that she had lived my entire life inside that dream. All of it. The rented room, the rice cooker on the fridge, the mountain at 7:40 in the morning. I did not have a single word ready. I have never in my life had less of a word ready. Then she frowned slightly and asked me why, towards the end of it, I had a tail. Astrid moved very fast after that. She expelled Sarah from the order, and then she expelled her own niece along with her, in the same afternoon, in writing, to buy back my goodwill. And then she came to find me and asked, in the careful voice of a woman negotiating from a bad position, what else it would take. I said I wanted her job. She was still deciding whether that was a joke when she opened her office door and found an 8th tier god standing in her corridor, waiting, to inform her that she would be taking her orders from Kira Ramirez from now on. I did not arrange that. I want to be clear. I have been given credit for it for years, and it was a coincidence, and it is the single luckiest thing that has ever happened to me. Kira came out to see the territory a few days later. She walked the whole site with me, foundations to river mouth, asking about drainage and grain storage and where I intended to put the second well, and 4 separate players live-streamed the entire thing. By that evening, the forums had decided we were engaged. They had also decided, on completely separate evidence, that I was engaged to Mad Marvin. Both threads ran for a week. Both of them survived my denial. One of them survived Marvin's denial, which he issued at some length to his plants. Zoltan collected 16,230,000 coins off the arena book that same afternoon and brought it to me in a cart. And then the Jade Dragon statue went up. 9,300 monster materials went into that thing. That is not a construction cost, that is an offering. It burns resources the way a furnace burns coal, and it ate 3 days of the entire guild's farming. When it lit, green mist came up out of the ground and rolled over the whole village, into the houses, over the fields, and every number I had went up by 100% at once. Productivity, migration, research, all 3. Doubled. Permanently. There is no other building in that world that does that. There were 4 in existence, and I had one of them, and a man had mailed it to me for free because I told him where to buy wine. I decided immediately that I wanted a second one. A second wonder meant going back to my god, and gods do not respond to requests, they respond to positions. So I donated the entire 16 million to the princess's war chest, publicly, in front of the court, in one transaction. And then I mentioned to Orion, in passing, in a corridor, that I had heard he was holding a blueprint. He gave me the Temple of Heaven without any discussion at all, and I have always suspected he had been waiting to see whether I would pay for the privilege of asking. Then I had to find somebody who could actually build it, which meant Pearl City and a dwarf. He opened at 10 million. I got him to 5, and I did not do it with charm, and I did not do it by walking away. I sat in his workshop for 2 hours and made him take me through every line of the estimate. I checked the material rates against the Pearl City exchange in front of him. Where a number was honest, I paid it without argument. Where it was not, I made him say so out loud. He has liked me enormously ever since. Craftsmen do not want to be flattered, and they do not want to be beaten down. They want to be checked by somebody who knows what they are looking at. The blueprint itself was locked behind 20 rounds of architectural riddles, asked by a mechanism, in the dark, in a basement. Load paths, roof geometry. The reason a column stands where it stands and not half a meter to the left. 20 questions, and I answered 19 of them cleanly and got the 20th wrong twice before I saw it, and the mechanism was extremely patient with me both times, which somehow made it considerably worse. And then Kira and I took a day off. I want that on the record properly, because it is the only one in this entire account. One day, in Pearl City, doing nothing at all. We ate things on sticks. We watched a street performer who was frankly not very good and applauded him anyway. She bought a hat that did not suit her, was told so by 3 separate strangers, and wore it for 6 hours out of pure spite. It was the first time since I opened my eyes on the 29th of May that I went a whole day without doing arithmetic about somebody's death. Groundbreaking on the Temple of Heaven cost 2 badges called Glory of the City Defender, which promote an ordinary resident to rare grade permanently, which is to say they take a person and make them permanently more than they were born as. I had 2. I gave one to Arthur the butler, who accepted it as his obvious due, and who has referred to himself in the third person ever since. I enjoy him enormously. I gave the other to an old carpenter, who had been on that site since the first 4 farmers and the first pot of soup, and who had spoken perhaps 9 words to me in total across the entire period. He went down on his knees in the mud and cried at my feet, and I stood there with a blueprint under my arm and absolutely no idea what to do with my hands. Then 500 coins a head put the whole guild on the scaffolding, and the thing began to go up. Kira made Legion Commander that season, the 15th in the Order's history, and the youngest, and she stood in front of the assembled legions in Astrid's old place, with her face doing absolutely nothing at all. That night she told me something I had not expected and did not know how to answer. She said her life had stopped feeling real, that it had gone too smoothly, that in 11 weeks she had gone from a grocery counter to command of a legion, and that when she went looking for the part where she had earned it, she could not find it, and that when she tried to look at her own future, there was nothing in it that frightened her. And while she was saying that, a tool opened on my panel that I had never seen, and that nobody on Earth had ever seen. Custom storyline. The game was offering to let me write her main quest, not select it from a list, write it. Objectives, targets, difficulty, rewards, the entire shape of her next year, authored by me, delivered to her as fate. I sat up all night planning 9 missions. She was in the room for most of it, pacing in her training kit, asking what I was doing, and I said nothing at all, because there is no way to tell a person that you are drafting their life and have it come out sounding like anything other than what it is. Mission 17 was the Spectre Ring, an intelligence network that had been running out of the sewers under Orange City for 2 years, feeding troop movements north, and that 3 separate Imperial investigations had failed to find because all 3 of them had started at the top. We started at the bottom. We took it apart in a night. Mission 18 was Reginald, the city lord's uncle, untouchable by anybody in the province, and everybody in the province knew exactly what he was, in the specific way that everybody knows and nobody writes down. We took him on the road outside his own estate, at dusk, with 4 nights and no warrant whatsoever. And then Kira read his crimes to him, all 10, in order, off a sheet of paper, in a level voice, standing in the road. The dam he had dynamited to clear a valley he wanted, with 800 workers living below it. The famine relief he had bought and resold. The letter he had written north offering the city in exchange for a title. She got to the end of the sheet and asked him whether any part of it was untrue. He did not say anything. He had about 4 seconds to say something, and he used them all standing very still. She executed him in the road. The reward the game paid out for that was an auction house blueprint, which sounds like an anticlimax, and which is worth considerably more than his estate. And then we had to survive the politics of it, which was substantially harder than the ambush. The city lord demanded satisfaction, formally, which under imperial custom meant a duel with the family's champion. So I paid Maeve 200,000 coins. Maeve is Kira's own second, the best duelist in the Legion, and I paid her to accept the challenge on the Garcia family's behalf, and then to lose. Slowly. Convincingly. Beautifully. 20 minutes of the finest sparring anybody in that arena had ever seen. 20 minutes of 2 women who genuinely like each other putting on an exhibition for 30,000 people, and at no point did the crowd suspect a thing, because both of them are far too good to be caught acting. And at the end of it, with the formal satisfaction discharged and the family's honor technically intact, Kira walked out onto the sand herself, took the sheet of paper out of her belt, and read Reginald's 10 crimes to 30,000 people in a voice that carried to the back row. Then she told them she had killed him herself, on the road, 4 days earlier, without a warrant, and that she would do it again. I have been in some rooms. I have never heard anything like the noise that arena made. The city lord had a problem after that, and the problem was that the city had already chosen. Not the nobles. The nobles were fine. The nobles wrote each other letters about procedure. The city chose, which is a different and much heavier object, and it chose because there were families in Oran City who had lost people in that valley 9 years ago, and had spent 9 years being told there was no evidence. There had always been evidence. It had been in a drawer in a manor house. He could arrest her and lose the city in a day, or he could do nothing and lose it over a season. He did nothing. It is always what they do. I have watched a great many powerful men choose the slower loss, and I have never once seen one of them notice that they were choosing. Kira spent the following week on military theory, and on the 4th day her instructor came to find me in a corridor. He was an old man with a limp and 40 years of teaching behind him, and he told me, in the flat voice of a man reporting a broken window, that he had nothing left to give her. Not that she was gifted, not that she was promising, that the well was dry and she had drunk it in 4 days. So she went and found something harder to break. The psionic sandbox belongs to the Wargame Guild, and the Wargame Guild's president had never lost a public match. Not once, not in the whole history of the thing. Kira bet 1,000,000 coins that she would beat him. She had learned the rules that morning. I watched her learn them. It took about 90 minutes, and she asked 4 questions. She beat him in the afternoon. And then Astrid took the bet. I want to be fair to Astrid here, because she has not come out of this account well. She had spent a month taking orders from a 17-year-old on the instruction of a god, and she had done it without complaint in public. And she was a Saint Realm mage with 400 years behind her, and she wanted, exactly once, to demonstrate the natural order of things in front of her own high command. She lost twice. The first one was close, and everyone agreed it was close. The second one is the one people still talk about, and it is the one I would put in a textbook. 20 simultaneous infantry infiltrations, all small, none of them decisive. none of them individually worth responding to. Launched at the same moment across the entire width of the board, so that a woman with 4 centuries of experience spent the whole match doing perfectly correct things about 20 problems that did not matter, while a single unremarkable column walked in through the back of her position and ended it. The high command of an imperial legion sat in a room and watched a saint concede to a grocer's daughter who had read the manual the previous morning. Nobody said anything for a while. Then a colonel started laughing and could not stop and had to leave. The bandit fortress came next, and I did the intelligence work the way I do all intelligence work, which is with money and no imagination whatsoever. There is a chat room where players sell what they have seen. Not a black market, nothing dramatic. A room where somebody who walked past something will tell you about it for a fee. 5 of them had been through that valley in the past month. 2,000 coins bought me the complete layout of a fortified bandit camp. Gate rotations, sentry posts, and the gaps between them, which building the chief slept in, which was not the one with his banner on it. Which of the 2 wells was poisoned, which turned out to be both of them. All 5 of those players joined the guild afterwards, unprompted, and I did not ask them to. People like being paid properly for information. It is genuinely astonishing how few organizations in either world have worked this out. Everybody wants intelligence, and everybody wants it free, and then they wonder why what they get is rumor. 5 in the morning. 500 knights on the tree line. And the gates opened from the inside because we had bought the man on them the night before for less than the price of a horse. Kira and Maeve took the chief straight up into the air. 5th tier, a real one, and they killed him at 400 meters in the gray light in front of his entire camp, and they did it up there specifically so that every single man on the ground could watch it happen and understand what the rest of the morning was going to be like. I spent that fight in a cellar with a crowbar. I am not being modest. The vault under that chief's house had 3 false floors and a genuinely clever counterweight lock, and I was down there for 11 minutes while a battle happened above my head, prying up flagstones and swearing. 100% of the camp captured, 0 casualties on our side, 94% of the assets seized, and the missing 6% was in a 4th floor I did not find until the second sweep the following day, which still annoys me. The game rated it SS, and I have never been prouder of a battle I did not attend. And then, in the ruins, at dawn, my god came to say goodbye. Orion, Starfeather, walked out of the smoke while people were still stacking weapons, and he told Kira what she was. Her family line runs back to a man who died at the 8th tier holding that empire's northern wall, and the gold in her blood comes from him. That is why it gilds equipment. That is why she went up 10 levels off 1 drink in a swamp. She had been carrying a dead hero around in her veins her entire life while working a grocery counter, and nobody had told her. And the reason nobody had told her is that the last 4 people who knew had died in the same war. She took it the way she takes everything, which is with her face completely still and 1 small nod. Then he said he had to leave. He did not say where. He did not say for how long. He had the particular careful voice of a being who has already decided not to explain. And I have heard that voice from a total of 3 people in 2 lives, and it has never once meant anything good. He gave Kira a teleport ring. He gave me a summoning scroll with her name on it. 1 use, reaches across any distance, and I did not find out until a very long time afterwards exactly how generous the word any was in that sentence. And then he was not there. No light, no wind. He was simply not one of the objects in the courtyard anymore. Kira looked at the space where an 8th tier god had been standing and asked me whether that meant something bad was coming. I said probably. She said good, and went to help stack the weapons. I hit level 29 that afternoon, which is the cap for that expansion, and discovered something nobody on Earth had discovered because nobody on Earth had got there. The overflow does not vanish. Experience earned past the cap crystallizes in your bag as a solid object, storable, transferable. It is a battery. Every hour I spent above the ceiling was being banked, and I sat down on a barrel in a burned-out camp and worked out that I now had a currency that could be poured into another living thing. That mattered enormously later. At the time, I just put it in my pocket. The other thing I took out of that camp was people, 2,000 of them, wives, children, elderly parents, the dependents of men who were now dead, who, understanding imperial practice, would have been inventoried and sold along with the livestock and the grain. I freed all of them, put them on carts, and sent them down the river road to a Puxi village. 2,000 human beings in one afternoon. My territory had started 11 days earlier with 4 farmers standing in a field and a pot of soup with black pepper in it. Kira, meanwhile, paraded the bandits' bodies through the streets of Oran City, and I would like nobody to finish this story with the impression that she is soft. She is not soft. She is the least soft person I have ever worked with. She simply happens to keep a list of who deserves what, and the list is accurate. And then I told Frost Panther the truth, in a tavern with a wet floor and a landlord who watered the wine. He had been operating for 6 weeks on the theory that his mentor was a 1900-year-old immortal who had quoted the Yellow Turban Rebellion on a hillside and vanished on the last syllable. I told him my name was Chen Lei, that I was 28, that I had sold advertising packages at Muyun Company for 4 years and had a couch with a spring coming through it and had once been passed over for a raise in March. He did not believe me. He sat there and told me, politely, that he understood I had reasons to protect my identity. So I put the gilded Tier 6 scroll on the table between us, and I watched a man find out that his mentor was a colleague and decide, in about 4 seconds, that it did not change anything he intended to do. He did not get angry. He did not get disappointed. He asked what I needed. That is why I told him. Everything after that required exactly one person on Earth who knew, and it had to be somebody who would react like that. He took me to the relevant department the next morning. 23rd floor, no windows, bad coffee. Political Commissar Zhou, Wei Chen. Mei Lin, who did not look remotely surprised to see me, and who I am fairly certain had known my name for a fortnight and had been sitting on it. And a 4th man, off to one side. 50s, ordinary face, cheap jacket, and a presence in that room that was completely wrong for the furniture. I recognized him immediately, and I recognized him from the stupidest possible source, which is that his portrait had been the header image of a history forum I wasted a year on at university. Li Yuan, the actual one. Warlord, chancellor, poet, dead for 1800 years and demonstrably not dead in any useful sense, sitting in a government office in Donghai at roughly 1% of the power he had once had, waiting for the psionic energy to come back far enough for him to start again. Nobody in that room introduced him. They all just watched me work it out, which took about 6 seconds, and Wei Chen told me later that my face during those 6 seconds was the most entertaining thing that had happened in that building all month. Then we did business, and the business was a spring. The Skrulls had a forward base at Lingwu Mountain sitting on a spring eye, drawing psionic energy off this planet 11 months before they were entitled to set foot on it. The department had known for a fortnight. They had photographs, they had signal intercepts, they had no method whatsoever because everything they could put on that mountain would die on the approach. I told them I would take it back. I asked for 50% of everything that came out of it, and I asked in the tone of a man discussing a supplier contract, because that is the only tone that works in a room like that. Political Commissar Zhou asked me, quite reasonably, why he should believe any of it. So I put a laser sidearm on the table. Skrull manufacture, taken off a body on the 19th floor of the Muyun building weeks before, and the point was not that I owned a gun. The point was that I had walked it through the door of a secure government facility, past their scanners on my person, and that they had not detected it, and that this had been true every single time I had visited them. The room went very quiet. I told them the Americas would be no help for a season, because they had woken their own ancients, and would be spending the next few months finding out what they had woken, and whether it took instructions. Then I said I was going alone. Wei Chen started to say something about support elements and extraction plans, and I crushed the hearthstone in my fist, and was standing in a field 1,100 kilometers away before he got to the verb. Slightly rude, extremely satisfying. And necessary, because if I had stayed in that room for another 10 minutes, they would have found a way to attach 40 people to me, and 40 people is 40 funerals. I stopped 3 kilometers out from Lingwu Mountain in a stand of pines at 1 in the morning and stood there for a while doing nothing at all. I want to be honest about that pause. It was not tactical. I had a scroll in my hand that I had been carrying for 11 days, and I had checked its timer perhaps 40 times, and I knew exactly what it did, and I still stood in a pine wood in Ningxia province for 4 minutes not breaking it. Because up to that night, everything I had done had a fallback. Die in the game, walk back in half an hour. Get caught in the street, take the helmet off. Every single risk I had taken since the 29th of May had an exit written into it, and I had written most of them myself. There is no exit from a mountain with 11 alien warships on it. There was also a line on my quest panel that had been sitting there for 11 days, grayed out, waiting. Become my student when you reach the 6th tier. A god had written that sentence, and then walked out of the world without saying where he was going. I broke the scroll. 2 minutes of charge time. You do not do anything during those 2 minutes. You cannot cancel, you cannot move fast, and the light comes off you in a column that anything with eyes can see from 10 kilometers. I stood in the trees for 120 seconds being a lighthouse and listening to my own heart. And then it finished, and something in the middle of my chest went from being a room to being a country. 6th tier, out here, in a body that had spent 28 years being unremarkable, in a pine wood, in the dark, in the actual physical world. The quest completed itself while I was still working out how to stand up in it. A god who had left the world reached back across whatever he had left it into and marked one line on a panel as done, and I have never found out where he was when he did it. I did not celebrate. I checked the time and started walking. Their perimeter was a shield dome 300 meters across, and it was rated to stop anything this planet had. It read me on approach the way a lock reads a key, and then it let me through, because a 6th tier being does not break an energy field. He agrees with it. You assimilate the frequency, and the field stops having an opinion about you. And I stepped through the outer wall of an alien military installation the way you step through a bead curtain in a noodle shop. There were 11 ships on that pad. I did not fight anybody. I want that clearly understood, because people have since described that night as a battle, and it was not a battle. It was a burglary. I went ship to ship in the dark with the priest's discipline on. Every pilot I touched became mine for as long as I wanted them, and I asked each one of them the same 3 questions and then sent them back to their post to behave completely normally, and they did, because they were. 3 questions. Where is the outbound schedule kept? Who signs cargo amendments? Where is the magazine? By 2:30, I had the whole shape of the place in my head, and not one alarm had sounded. The commander's adjutant was asleep. I took him without waking him properly, which is a thing you can do and which I do not recommend doing often, and I had him get up, dress, walk to his own station, and file a routine cargo amendment on the outbound transport. The transport was scheduled to lift at dawn for Skrull Star, carrying sealed tanks of psionic energy drawn off my planet. He changed the manifest. 30 tactical missiles out of that base's own magazine went into the hold, armed, on a timer set to the far side, and the tanks came off and stayed on the mountain where they belonged. Then I sent him back to bed. At 4:05 in the morning, I sat on a ridge above Lingwu Mountain and watched an alien freighter lift off Chinese soil, turn, and go through the rift carrying an entire munitions load that its own crew had loaded and signed for. It came out on the other side inside their orbital storage island. That is where the psionic energy goes. All of it, from every world they are drawing on, concentrated and stacked and stored in one place, because centralizing your logistics is efficient right up until the exact moment it is not. 30 warheads went off inside a stockpile of concentrated energy. I did not see it. Nobody on Earth saw it. What we saw was the rift. The rift over that mountain, which is a hole about 40 meters across, began throwing debris back through onto our side, and it did it for 11 minutes without stopping. Structural plate, deck sections, things I could not identify and did not want to. A piece of hull the size of a bus came through and buried itself in the hillside 200 meters from me, still glowing. I stood on a ridge in Ningxia province and watched fragments of another planet's infrastructure fall out of a hole in my own sky. 50 square kilometers of island came apart above their capital city that night, and their strongest living being had to come out personally and hold what was left of it in the air with his hands, and he could hold the mass, and he could not hold what was inside it. The energy went into the city. I did not know any of that at the time. I found out months later, on their side, from a television in a car. The base commander came out of his bunker while the debris was still falling, which was brave. I turned him into a sheep. That scroll came from Gunter, the functionary at the Scholar Sanctuary, who had thrown me out of a hall for having a brain full of mush, and had then apologized in front of everyone and given me a present out of his own pocket. I had been carrying it for weeks with no particular plan. I turned an alien field commander into livestock, and then I set the livestock on fire, and I would like to be able to tell you that I felt something complicated about that. I did not. He had signed the orders for the ghosts on the mountain road, and 400 people were going to have gone off that road, and I have the number. That left about 100 Skrulls on the mountain with no ships, no commander, and no rift. I made them the offer once. Surrender, be taken into custody, be treated according to the terms. One of them made a speech about it. I do not speak enough of the formal register to have followed all of it, but the shape of it was clear enough. And the shape of it was that 100 soldiers of a superior civilization do not negotiate with a local. So I destroyed one grounded transport with its crew aboard in 25 seconds in front of the other 90. I gave them nothing to look at afterwards. There was a ship, and then there was not one, and then it was quiet. And then I made the offer a second time, in exactly the same words, in the same tone. They surrendered, all of them, at once, without discussion. I have thought about that a great deal since, and what stays with me is not the fire. It is that the single most effective thing I did in either of my lives was arithmetic performed out loud in front of an audience that had the option of checking my working. Li Yuan and Wang Xian came in over the ridge at about 6 in the morning, on flying swords. Of course on flying swords. A warlord 1800 years dead and an emperor 600 years dead arriving at dawn to tie up prisoners. Both of them at a fraction of what they had been. Both of them looking around a mountain full of alien wreckage with the mild professional interest of men who have seen a great many battlefields and are appraising this one. Wang Xian asked me who had commanded here. I pointed at a scorch mark. He nodded slowly and said something about how the young are always in such a hurry, and then he went and started binding prisoners with a length of rope he produced from somewhere, personally, by hand, an emperor of the Ming tying knots at dawn because the job needed doing. Then the sky opened again, and it was not a Skrull. The Singer civilization's war inspector came through in person, for the first time since the treaty was signed, because a rift had been used in breach of the terms, and there was a procedure. She closed it permanently. It took about 4 seconds, and she did not appear to concentrate. That was the end of the Skrull presence on Earth for the remainder of the grace year. Not a victory, a cancellation. 11 months of horizon handed back to 8 billion people by an administrator ticking a box, and the fact that the box existed at all was the only reason anybody was still alive to benefit from it. Then she looked at me. She said that a human being who had accurately predicted 11 months of a war he had not yet fought was an interesting object. Object. That is the word. Not person. She was not being cruel, she was being precise, and I have never been more thoroughly put in my place by anybody in my life. And then she offered me a place at an academy. Not on this planet. Not in this arm of anything I could point at. A school for the kind of being that closes rifts. And she offered it the way you offer a bright village child a scholarship, which is to say pleasantly, and without any particular interest in the child's opinion, and with the clear implication that the offer was for her benefit rather than mine. And then she put something under my skin. A beacon. Her word. If I am ever about to die on this world, she will know about it, and she may choose to intervene, and she was extremely specific about the word may. I have a thing inside my chest that was put there by a civilization which regards my entire species as an item of correspondence. I did not agree to it. I cannot get it out. I have had 4 different beings look at it since, and every one of them has declined to touch it. On the other side of that sealed rift, the 5 great powers of Skrull Star spent the following days tearing pieces out of each other in committee over whose fault the island had been, and the alliance that had crossed a galaxy to strip this planet started coming apart over an insurance claim. I did not know that either. I was busy. I climbed down into the spring eye at Lingwu Mountain, into the water, with my eyes shut and my hands flat on the rock, and I drank. Not metaphorically. You go in and you open and it comes into you, and it keeps coming, and there is a point somewhere in the middle of it where the sensible thing to do is stop, and I went past that point and kept going until my body physically refused to take another drop. When I came up out of that hole, it was full daylight, and I was level 31, second tier, out here, in a country that 4 weeks earlier had contained precisely 0 superhuman beings. 4 weeks. 4 weeks ago, I had 6 square meters and a rice cooker balanced on top of a mini-fridge, and a landlord I was avoiding on the stairs, and a resignation letter I had not signed. I had spent every yuan I owned on a plastic hat, and I had gone up a mountain to sit in a rock basin at 7:40 in the morning, entirely alone, with absolutely no proof that anything I remembered was real. And now I was standing in a captured alien installation in Ningxia province, with an emperor of the Ming tying up prisoners behind me, holding a spring that a civilization had crossed a galaxy to steal, and the water in it was mine. Frost Panther called me that afternoon and asked if I was all right. Kira sent a message through the game asking where I had gone. Mei Lin filed a report that I have never been allowed to read. And the thing that sits behind my teeth, Every single time somebody in a market square or a chat channel or a government briefing room calls me Boss Jin is not the mountain, and it is not the ships, and it is not the number on my panel. It is that there is a beacon under my ribs, and it does not care about this planet, and it does not care about the war. Somebody very far away is watching one man, and I have absolutely no idea what she intends to do about it.